This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate what if Naruto accidentally traveled to another dimension where his parents were alive. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
How he got into the cramped quarters of his former office was a mystery to the Rokudame. He couldn't recall how he got lost in the village, but he did it somehow. He crossed the debris and the rubble. As he passed the charred corpses and the dried blood that splattered on the concrete and in the weeds, he had managed to prevent the bile from rising in his throat. He had no idea how he had managed to look back on the pleasant memories of his former village without breaking down in tears. As he examined his shattered village from the inside out, he forced down the bile that had risen in his throat. He was forced to accept responsibility for the current state of affairs. His face was etched with a frown. He managed to draw blood, and he bit his lip to stop the tears from streaming down his face. He had not shed a tear since the end of the war, and he had no intention of doing so. Uncontrollably, he felt snot run down his nose and tears pour down his face. His heart felt like it was being squeezed by cold, hard hands, and he let out a cry. As he surveyed his village, the one he had vowed to defend and the one he had failed to do so, his legs shook. A rough voice called out to him, "Kid," and he immediately stood up. He used the sleeve of his Hokage coat to wipe away his tears and snot. As he entered his mindscape, he inhaled deeply, closed his eyes, and opened them when his cheek was kissed by the cool sewer temperature. He approached his lone remaining friend, the voice of his mindscape. He had managed to survive because of the fox. At the same time, he felt deeply guilty and honored. He moved in the direction of a door, which he slowly opened to reveal a bright white room. Little pieces of chakra drifted through the room and entered him, creating an odd feeling of warmth in his chest. The fox made a soft sound as it rested its head on its paws. He appeared to be asleep, but he was actually awake. A tiny part of him wished he could do something to alleviate his sorrow as his red eyes scanned Naruto. But he couldn't. He wasn't the type to console others, and he never truly felt the sorrow of another person the way Naruto did. He considered telling the kid that he could help him and make things right. He was uncertain about Naruto's capacity to endure the physical toll it would require. He wasn't even sure if he could handle the physical discomfort that this action would bring about. But he was certain that it would help the Rokudame and make things better. He let out a sigh. "I know how to fix this." The Rokudame's lips formed a very slight smile, and the fox felt like growling. The smile was interpreted as a question, and the kid was apparently asking him questions. His eyes glowed with uncertainty and confusion, and his eyebrows raised. Naruto was aware that this was not the kid. Whether he wanted it or not, the fox was going to help the kid in some way as he was gradually dying of depression. The kid stiffened a little as the demon let his chakra seep into Naruto after he made no protests. He hadn't entered tailed beast mode in a long time. To be honest, he initially came across as a little panicked. It felt strangely warm, something he hadn't experienced since he was 16. He let his body absorb the chakra that was leaking into him and covering his typical ninja clothes like a cloak. He closed his eyes and returned to reality without protest. His tiny smile turned into a grin as the power that permeated him grew. After hearing the Kyuubi's plan, he was powerless to stop it. After this, he would have the power to alter everything. He would be able to save his village and his valued citizens. He felt the surrounding nature come to life as he opened his eyes. He could hear the water flowing and the birds singing. He sensed that his country's trees were growing slowly, and soon the resolve that had been missing for a long time came back. His voice was bursting with excitement as he asked, "So how are we going to do this, Kyuubi?" His gloomy aura was replaced by an overwhelming amount of energy. In the past, he probably would have hated Naruto's excitement, but the creature inside him did not. His concept was extremely well considered. Aside from a few minor issues, the plan was flawless and probably unassailable. The blonde would not be able to make it through the journey he had recommended, despite the high likelihood of success. The ferocious fox demon, however, had no intention of dying or warning the kid that they might. Kyuubi's rambling, as he called it, was never really heard by the demon blonde. "Now, listen up and sit down." Naturally, he never paid attention because the kid would be so preoccupied with his own thoughts that, in the next instant, they would be on the verge of death after the Kyuubi finished his ramblings. The Kyuubi's suggestion was completely different from the Rokudame's reputation for flourishing under duress. They weren't up against an enemy. In fact, Kyuubi didn't even know what they were up against, but it was killing his host. There was a slight but discernible frown on the Rokudame's face as he relaxed. But listening to the fox never helped him. He would listen now because he would nearly die the last time he didn't. As instructed by the fox, he stretched his legs and leaned against his desk, which was somehow still upright. "First you have to know doing this can change you physically. It could alter your appearance, so don't freak out, however it most likely won't happen. If you're going to do this, then there are some other things you need to know. First, this is a warp ceiling. You remember when Himori taught you that, right? The blonde pondered the query, but it had been a while since he had seen Himori. He did recall that she had taught him calligraphy and seals. A sigh of relief escaped his chest as he nodded his head. A sigh came from the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki. Good, good. It will be that kind of seal. I hope you have that seal with you, Kit. As he dug through his pouch on his right leg, the Rokudame was surprised to find the small sealing paper, but he didn't think he had it. He exclaimed, "I got it," while pointing to the seal and flashing a crazy smile. The fox merely rolled his eyes, but a tiny smile appeared on his face as well. Although he was unsure of the specifics, he knew it would be interesting if they made it out alive. "Alright, Kit, here is what you need to do." For the bored Rokudame, the next hour had gone by very slowly. He had been adjusting his warp seal while he leaned on his desk. Even though the design was extremely intricate and went beyond what he had accomplished in his limited time as a Fuinjutsu master, he managed to complete it. Making the ink took him more than 15 minutes, and he fixed the seal with a haphazard piece of wood. After that, he had spent 45 minutes perfecting the seal. As he stood up and stretched out, he put the tiny seal back in his pouch. He whispered to himself, "I better head back to camp and pack my stuff." He continued to look at the recently planted trees as he left the office. Those trees had been planted there by him some time ago. Apparently, those trees would no longer be required. He would soon make things right. The Rokudame was both excited and a little nervous on his way to camp. He also had the impression that the fox had not given him a crucial piece of information that would have allowed him to decide whether or not he truly wanted to do this. It didn't matter, so he postponed asking. He was going to seize the opportunity that presented itself. He approached his camp more and more. His sleeping bag and the tent he had set up were visible. He stopped and collected his belongings. He took his seal, adorned kunais and his scrolls. He took some food rations and his money. Then he scanned the camp once more and found a photograph. He could feel the tears welling up in his eyes, and his breath had become trapped in his throat. He swiftly removed them and snapped the photo while looking at all of his beloved people's faces. He muttered to himself, "I promise, I'll make things right this time. Everything will be better." Naruto ignored the fox's snort, even though he could feel it. After removing the tiny seal, he proceeded to perform hand signals. Unaware that he had made a mistake on one of them, he bit his thumb and pressed it against the center of the seal. Pain shot up his body as a blinding red light engulfed him. The demon felt an unimaginable pain and yelled, "Shit, what the hell did you do, Kit?" He let out a loud howl as it swept through his body. The fox thought he was about to be torn to pieces. The Rokudame snarled, his skin crawling with pain. He appeared to be on fire, and he soon realized that he was. His skin begged to separate from his bone and flesh. He clenched his teeth and watched in horror for a while before his vision blurred and he closed his eyes, drifting through the red light until he was no longer visible. The bright sun greeted him as he opened his eyes after what seemed like hours of excruciating pain. He was surrounded by green grass and numerous sunflowers that rose to a great height. All he could do was look at the lovely flowers. Despite his best efforts, he was unable to move his bruised body. Even though Naruto had previously been depressed, he had never stopped moving because he felt vulnerable and couldn't stand the stillness of his body. But now was a different matter. He was forced to give in to the agony that had taken hold of him. He watched the sunflowers dance in the breeze and groaned in agony. He kept waiting until he heard gentle footsteps on the sunflowers and grass. He looked around to find the owner of the footsteps as his hope reached an all-time high. An elderly woman's wide eyes scanned him. When the woman started questioning him and calling for assistance, Naruto closed his eyes and plunged into a black abyss because he could no longer bear the pain. Life's patterns are as gentle as ashes. Like the sickness that confines us, we come and go. To the world that we wish we had additionally, to shut the doors that bear our wounds. As he felt himself waking, gentle fingers caressed his forehead. He heard voices and made every effort to identify them, but they were muffled. When he opened his eyes and saw the hazy figure caressing his head, he furrowed his brows. She was dressed as a typical Konohagakure nurse. Her dark brown hair, which reached her breasts, could have been mistaken for black. She had brown eyes, too. She heard someone speaking as she looked up. She gazed down at him with wide eyes, and his hearing and vision improved. She rose slowly and started giving orders to everyone else present. Her voice was familiar, and he glanced at her face, trying to identify her. "Go and call for them." She returned her focus to him and grinned broadly. He felt like gasping when he got a better look at her because she was sitting next to him just a few seconds before. She was one of his most valued individuals. He believed he would never see that person again. With her hair longer and without her pig, ton, Shizun looked completely different. He pondered whether she thought he looked different as well. She had lost her life while fighting to save those in need of medical care. He wondered if he had died as he turned to face her. Her hair was longer, but otherwise she didn't look any different. He scowled at her. She gave him a gentle, hello, before starting to rub her thumb across his forehead once more. He even briefly closed his eyes before returning her greeting, which was a very calming gesture. Hi. He was about to say her name when he paused. He looked at Shizun inquiringly and touched his throat. He didn't have his own voice. Rather, it was a child's voice. He frantically glanced around before catching himself. Fortunately, Shizun missed his mild panic attack because she was examining his IV. She gave him a warm smile as she looked over at him. She suggested, how about we tell each other about ourselves? He gave her a somewhat amusing look. He was already aware of her identity. Why should he be reminded of that information? He immediately nodded his head in agreement with her suggestion as a light bulb appeared on top of his head. Was he in the past, and if so, how far and when, had the Kyuubi's plan truly succeeded? Then he remembered what Shizun, with the long hair, had said. The nurse had been told to get someone by her. Who might it be? She would call for someone, but why? Who could she call if he was in the past? He had no guardian or parents. Naruto gave her another curious glance and said, well, then let's do the icebreaker. Didn't she simply suggest that he tell her about himself as an icebreaker? Shizun pulled Naruto out of his reverie without realizing it. I'll tell you about me and you'll say some things about yourself. So how about we start with me? She asked. He listened to her talk about herself while nodding. He wasn't listening to her as she talked about her interest and other topics. Why did he sound like a child if he had been successful in time travel? Did it also change his body? What else about him was unique? Did he appear different? Even though he probably didn't. He couldn't ignore that. According to the Kyuubi, there may be some differences in him. He desperately wanted to enter his mindscape and ask the prisoner inside of him for answers. Naruto turned back to the Shizun with the long hair. All right, tell me about. There was a loud knock on the door, and you could hear faint murmurs coming from outside. Shizun stood up and gave him a head pat. She smiled warmly at him and pivoted to answer the door. His mind was racing with more questions, but he chose to confront the beast inside of him. The only drawback to his ability to communicate with the Kyuubi without entering his mind was that he was limited to speaking aloud. He swore at himself. He had been by himself for so long that he had forgotten that talking to oneself or the inner demon wasn't exactly normal. He chose to take the risk and scowled. He muttered, Kyuubi, as he heard the door open. Naruto was safe because his face was obscured by something resembling a shower curtain. As he waited for a response, he heard more murmurs outside. Naruto could only shake his head in agreement as he said, Kid, I know you have questions, but I can't answer them right now. Just wait it out. He had placed himself in a position that would make him appear insane. And since most people wouldn't recognize him if this had happened in the past, he didn't want to come across as strange. Yes, he was capable of being awkward, but he didn't want to come across as completely insane. He started to listen in on the conversation just outside the curtain, holding his breath. Their exceptional stealth abilities made it clear that they were all skilled ninjas. He chose not to interfere with his chakra in order to listen to their conversation because he was unable to hear anything they said. Based on his knowledge that he was in a child's body, he was unsure if the body would be able to accomplish that. He heard footsteps as Shizun led a few individuals into his chamber. The child the IT agent was pursuing was visible through the curtain. Ibiki smiled warmly and gently as he looked over the child, but he did not stop his eyes from dancing in a menacing manner. Please come with us, boy. Silently, the impostor assuming the identity of the fourth Hokage's son sat in his bed. He glanced first at Ibiki's assistant and then at the IT agnet, Inoichi. The Yamanaka appeared quite upset, and Ibiki wasn't particularly interested in learning why. He was aware that Inoichi's daughter was acquainted with the Yondaimi's son. He was aware that Inoichi and the fourth Hokage's son had even shared a bond, if you will. But since this wasn't the Hokage's son, he didn't understand why the Yamanaka had his lips in a frown and his brows knitted. The boy with the blonde hair looked at them uneasily while he scratched his cheek. He left his hospital bed. Despite the boy's obvious pain, Ibiki maintained a stoic expression throughout. The observation made him smile in his mind. The boy was a ninja. The sadistic IT agent would always be more than happy to put the bastard in his place, just like any other person who attempted to pass for the Yondaimi's son. Which he wasn't. He was aware of how much the Yondaimi cherished his son, and a fake henge like the one the blonde was wearing would not be forgiven for reviving those memories following the terrible event on October 10th. But he would make the blonde think that he thought the boy was the son of the Yondaimis. Ibiki would have to give him credit, though. The spy, or whatever the hell the ninja was posing as, was skilled at entering restricted areas, which included highly secure locations like Konohagakure. Ibiki was not one to deny credit where credit was due. He would, therefore. The boy with the blonde hair had indeed entered Konohagakure, but he arrived 2 years too late. Ibiki took the boy by the shoulder and gave it a rough pat as well. With a disgusting tone, he said, "Don't worry boy, you'll be just fine." He was grinning broadly as he gazed down at his most recent task. The IT agent wanted to laugh, but she refrained from cackling. The circumstances were simply too much. He hurriedly ignored it and made his way to the IT division. The shinobi was talented, but he was certain the boy would lose it after confronting a man who was even more dangerous than Ibiki. In addition, he was a terrifying man when he desired to be the Yondaime Hokage. The ashes were his previous acts of violence. He snoozes on grass that has a sun-like scent. The only threat he faces is the gun. That is facing his eyes. To ascertain whether he is a spy, for war's wages, or more, Minato Namikaze was furious. His anger had been building since the start of the week, but it was only getting worse at this point. He had started the fire earlier in the week while he was in his office finishing up his endless paperwork. In his office, an Anbu stormed in. She looked at him anxiously and bowed rapidly. She said, "Hokage. Sama." Minato could tell by the cracking of her voice that what he was about to hear would be bemusing. He questioned, "Yes, Dove?" She shifted her weight from her left leg to her right leg as he focused all of his attention on her. He waited for her to speak, and most people knew that Namikaze was a patient man. He sensed her uneasiness as she cleared her throat. Before she could finish, he got up and slammed his hands on the desk. "I have just gotten word that someone has infiltrated Konohagakure. Minato discovered something about her after she jumped, recently hired." Minato did not intend to yell at her, but he did say, "What do you mean, Dove? Shinobi were securing the border, right?" His tone made her jump again, and she nodded her head. It was Minato who heard the poor Anbu gulp. Yes sir. However, there is one more significant piece of data about the intruder." "And what is it?" "He is hanging as your son." Minato scowled at the IT center's entrance. He was eagerly awaiting the arrival of Ibiki and Inoichi. He glanced at the ticking clock on the walls. He didn't care that it had been longer than he had anticipated. He had a great deal of patience. He waited for another 15 minutes before hearing footsteps reverberating through the corridors. The Yondaime tensed a little, then relaxed once more. He heard Ibiki say, "Get the seals on him, Yamanaka. It'd be best that we be careful with the boy." Before long, the man had come into the room. He appeared worn out and a little slow. Minato looked at the IT agent inquiringly. He smirked at the Yondaime and said, "He hasn't said anything yet really. On the way here he didn't beg and plead for mercy, so I'd give 2 minutes with you and he should crack." Minato shrugged, laughing. "We can only hope so." It took a few minutes for them to start setting up. He raised an eyebrow at the door when he heard footsteps. Just as he finished, a woman dressed as a nurse entered. She was Shizun, he knew. Her gaze wandered around before finally settling on his, and she scampered in his direction. She had 2 pieces of paper in her hands. He saw 2 of them, a pink one with words on it and a white one with a strange design. Inoichi entered a few seconds later, his face horrified. After glancing back into the room, he glanced behind him once more. In a firm voice, she declared, "Hokage. Sama, this interrogation must be stopped immediately." Minato scowled at her without wasting any time. With a deadly tone, he said, "That man is impersonating my son and you want to stop me?" She flinched and stepped back. She cleared her throat and shook her head. She paused and glanced down at her papers before saying, "Hokage. Sama, I ran some blood tests on him and," she spoke in a quiet, comforting voice. "Hokage. Sama, he is your son." The cool breeze snipped at her nose as soft snow fell to the ground. She looked around her tiny village as her eyes widened in surprise. Others also surveyed the area, their eyes full of curiosity. As the snow grew thicker, it only piled high when it hit the ground. Konohagakure never experienced snowfall. Kushina scowled as she hurried home, embracing herself as the temperature dropped. She began to ask, "What the hell is going on?" but quickly stopped when she felt a knot in her stomach. She felt as though she had to follow the strange pull. She soon adopted a stoic expression as she approached Pull, who was at the IT center. Her mind was yelling and pleading with her to control it. Something seemed to be attempting to grab hold of her. But she was powerless over it, and she let herself be carried wherever she had to go. When she arrived, the pull ceased, leaving her standing in front of the high security structure. She panicked as she regained complete control. "What on earth was that?" she asked. She glanced at the building again, and her stomach flipped. She wasn't sure exactly what it was, but she knew there was something there for her. She took a tentative step forward while biting her lip. She muttered to herself, "Whatever it is, it can't be as bad as that feeling I had years ago," and proceeded to the entrance, where 2 guards were stationed. They gave her puzzled looks, and she said, "I was called here by my husband, for some strange reason." The guards let her in after she said that. The words, "Don't be ridiculous, Shizun," Minato snarled. His eyes were considerably darker than usual. "We both know that that isn't at all possible." Without raising any more objections, Shizun let the Hokage pass her and enter the interrogation room. For a moment, Minato felt like scoffing and gasping as she gazed at the boy. Was this his henge? If the boy was a spy, he had some terrible information, but it was also disgusting to see how accurate he was with nearly every detail. His son's hair color was blonde, but the boy's was blonde. Like his wife, his son's hair was a fiery red. And like his wife, the boy had dark blue eyes. The eyes of his son were light blue. But the details that stood out the most were the whiskers, not the most outrageous ones. Their appearance might have been that of scars. The boy probably received them as initiation markings from his clan, and he was unable to get rid of them when he hanged. Naruto? He asked himself. There was that tiny part of him that wished he had gone back to Konohagakure and thought this was his son. He wanted to think it was just another prank, that his son would just show up with his red hair and light blue eyes and yell, "Surprise! Did you miss me?" And that he would say, "Yeah, I did miss you." Then they would all be reunited with Konohagakure. However, since his son was no longer with him, that was only a faint dream that would never come true. Minato recognized the sad expression on the fake Naruto's face as soon as he looked up at him. Minato shook his head and sighed. "Whatever sick game this is, it's over. You can undo your horrible henge and tell me who sent you." Confusion scrunched up the fake Naruto's face. He asked, "What do you mean sick game?" Minato let out a grunt. "So you think you're innocent?" "Innocent of what?" Minato suppressed the urge to scream at the incooperative child. "Of infiltrating Konohagakure and spying." In the end, Naruto wanted to punch something and throw up. What on earth took place? Where am I? To be honest, he was perplexed and thought he might be having a panic attack. Did I sneak into Konoha and spy on people? Absolutely not. He blurted out, "Where's your proof?" and felt the fox rumbling inside of him, probably trying to take over his body so he could control the situation. But he knew his dad would notice right away, so they couldn't, primarily due to his eyes changing, since no one would ever suspect him if his eyes turned into red slits on their own, but also due to his chakra changing. Minato's eye moved slightly, and he opened his mouth to respond, but quickly closed it again. So they didn't have any evidence. Additionally, he already recognizes me. Why did I go to a place where I was a criminal? With a slightly agitated expression, Minato stated, "I don't have any. But isn't it a bit strange for you to henge as my son? By the way you can cut the crap, I already know that you're not Naruto." He blurted out once more, "So then why did you call me Naruto?" Minato appeared surprised, his mouth open to respond, his eyes wide, but as the Yondaime scowled at him, it snapped shut and Naruto swallowed. "I'm asking the questions, aren't I? I'm being falsely accused, aren't I?" Minato now had a very irritated expression. The boy wouldn't even move, even though his Yondaime status and his piercing gaze usually had a way of getting people to just talk. Stubborn. Minato sighed, pulled back outside, and went to seek assistance. He knew the one person who could extract the truth from the boy, since it appeared he wouldn't be able to. "Inoichi, I need your assistance." Kushina strained as she gazed at the boy seated in the chair and out the glass window. He reminded her of bright days with his eyes and his sunny blonde hair. She questioned who could have done that to a youngster as innocent as he was, as the whiskers on his cheeks appeared to be deep cuts. Whoever did that, she was half inclined to tear them to pieces. The guard swallowed when she asked, "Why is that boy being interrogated?" "Can't you see, Kushina? Sama? He is pretending to be your son." She cast a scornful glance at the guard. She only said, "He's not pretending," before turning back to face the window. In one way or another, this boy, whoever he was her son. She sensed it. Many people were forced to rush into their homes at the last minute as the snow outside continued to fall and the gentle drizzle became intense. A figure in the shadows said, "It appears we have an unexpected guest." Another, grinning mischievously, added, "Yes, and a new experiment. It seems we will have our way after all." Ooh, the harsh voice spat at him. "Kid, that was very stupid of you." He wanted to respond, but he knew that was not possible, so he just listened. "You should have allowed me to take control. When you knew your father he was much nicer then because you were his son." Everyone implied that he wasn't the Yondaime's son, and there it was once more. He was, and the fox was aware of it, but he was unable to express his disapproval to the fox without appearing to need to be admitted to a mental health facility. Even his own father, who gave him a look and referred to him as Naruto, claimed he was acting. He assumed he wasn't where he was supposed to be because he only had one clue as to what would happen. Though not his past, it was the past. Something was screwed up during your sealing, you sent us to a whole other dimension. Despite faltering, Naruto maintained his composure. An entirely different dimension. What made Kami decide to so severely mistreat me that they transported me to a dimension where a different version of myself was already alive? That must have been the cause of everyone's anxiety around him. He just so happened to get in the way and show up as a henge, as his father called him, but there was another him in this world, alive and breathing. It appeared that he would have to start thinking like Shikamaru because of this circumstance, which was no small task. He chose to close his eyes and start coming up with a story on his own. Who was he? He was unable to say that because another Naruto was occupying this world. Furthermore, he was unable to identify himself as an Uzumaki. It's one thing to give up my name, but what about my identity? This is some truly cruel stuff. Additionally, Naruto needed to determine his exact age. He was now a child instead of an adult. And a young child, not just a teenager. That implies that I, as well as every other Naruto in the world, am also young. I estimate that he is around 10 years old, and he may be in the academy. When Naruto saw that someone was observing him, he opened his eyes and made an effort to conceal his obvious discomfort. He couldn't tell who was staring at him behind that thick glass because the glass mirror only reflected himself. I'm guessing they believe you're older than you actually look, possible in your teens. Ignoring the fox, Naruto reluctantly fixed his gaze on the other person in the mirror. He said bluntly, "You can stop staring." His small voice had a hint of venom, but not enough to be intimidating. Kid, stop giving them the impression you are older than you are, or do you want them to possibly give you a death sentence? He sighed, turned his head away, and started to consider his plan further. Inoichi entered the room and scowled a little when he noticed the blue eyes watching him serenely. He was aware that he should maintain an expressionless face, but the way those blue eyes gazed at him made him want to frown. Daddy is real? Has Naruto left? He cleared his throat before approaching Naruto. The child hung as Naruto, and put his hands on his head. I'm going to be looking through your mind, at all of your memories and see exactly who you are. If you would like to confess your crimes, then I ask that you speak now. The silence was deafening, and Inoichi knew the child was being stubborn and would not speak. Similar to his mom, Inoichi winced. You know I'm innocent, don't you, Inoichi-san? Inoichi scowled and immediately drew his hands back. He asked quickly, how do you know my name? With a shocked expression on his face, but he knew it wasn't surprising. Since this is Naru, Ino's dad, right? You guys run that flower shop. Ah, what was it called it again? Yamanaka Flowers, right? Inoichi faltered a little as the color in his face faded. He was no longer able to deny it, regardless of the physical differences. Daddy, is he truly gone? He said simply, I must be going, and left the interrogation room to enter the viewing room. I am sorry, Hokage. Sama, but I could not. Looking at the Hokage, who appeared to be choking on his sobs, Inoichi paused. Although Kushina was also present, she was just grinning rather than crying. Minato wiped his face with his palms and said, it's okay, Inoichi. I will handle it from here. Kushina grinned broadly as they both observed Minato approaching the blonde Naruto after passing the metal door. No, he isn't truly Ino-chan. Here he is. He was seated in an unidentified location. Dead rats littered the floor, and there was a pervasive stench of death. The ceiling was made of dark rock. There was no sky. He looked around the strange location while embracing himself. With small weed fragments spread out in some spots, it appeared to be some kind of cave. Numerous cages were present, and those cages contained bodies. Where am I? When Naruto looked up, he noticed a figure moving along the stone path. His clothes were ripped and bloody, and his feet were bare. His hair was bright red, but he couldn't see his face because his head was down. Uzumaki. He rose slowly and approached the boy's trembling body. He took care to be cautious at every turn. When he finally approached him, he saw that the boy gave him no acknowledgement. Naruto was unable to follow the boy's rambling, which was incoherent. He attempted to reassure him, saying, it's okay. I'm going to help you and get out of this place. The boy's face snapped up in horror as he screamed, it's too late. Naruto practically leapt back out of the way. It's over, you can't save me. He saw himself standing there. The boy and he shared the same features, but they were different. Naruto felt compelled to stay despite the boy's piercing blue eyes screaming for him to flee. "I'll get you out of here, let's go." "No, they'll find me and do those horrible things to me. You can't take from this place, I'm tied here." With a frown, Naruto took the child's hand. "There is no way in hell I'm leaving some kid in this place, Dadbeo." As he pulled the child along, he observed that there was no security at all, just blatantly obvious traps placed here and there. Though he hesitated occasionally, the child mostly let him pull him until they reached an agreement. "I can't leave, I told you, they'll find us, they'll hurt everyone." "Listen kid, I know you're scared, but I won't let anyone hurt you. Whatever happened here is history, okay? I'll take you back wherever you belong." Naruto tried to get the child outside, but he just stood there. It was only a single, easy step. However, his peculiar appearance did not accept it. "I can't go back, but I can give you what you need to stop them." At this point, Naruto was finally perplexed. "What? Stop talking nonsense, kid. Let's go." The child took Naruto's hand and put it to his forehead. As the child's eyes went completely white and he started to perform strange jutsu while muttering the hand signals, Naruto watched in horror and sorrow. Naruto yelled, "Hell no," and tried to yank his hand away, but it remained in place. What is this child up to? Then he sensed it. He felt as though he would burst at any moment as a sharp pain struck his ribs, then his spine, then his throat, and finally his brain. Abruptly, a flash of light appeared before his eyes. Everywhere you looked were the bodies of children, some with and some without limbs. Some have their heads, while others don't. Naruto felt like throwing up because it was so awful. Who is going to do this? Then he saw his strange-looking counterpart cowering into a corner and a figure approaching him quickly while giggling uncontrollably. "This is it, Naruto. We can finally rid you of that horrid demon. Are you ready?" Then nothing was there. Minato took his bowl of ramen and started eating it while Kushina ate her plate in a very strange location. "Kushina, do you think this is a good idea?" "What I'm doing, I mean?" Minato asked. She put the bowl down and looked meaningfully at Minato, her features soft. Given that the child had some connection to Naruto's memories, Minato had halted the interrogation of Naruto some time ago. To a strange degree, he persuaded himself that was his son. It was clear to Minato that Naruto was not a spy because he recognized a lot of the people who came into his room and spoke with them. However, when questioned about his identity, Naruto pretended to be unintelligent. "I'm Naruto, the world's #1 knucklehead ninja." The boy would always respond, even though the blonde knew what Minato was talking about from the clan in which he was raised in the village, before striking the same kind of pose as Guy. Normally, when Naruto said it, Minato would have responded, "I'm Namikaze Naruto, Konoha's #1 knucklehead ninja." This made Minato uneasy. It would only be a matter of time until he discovered that Naruto had omitted the where and the who. Taking a rather tiny bite of her ramen, Kushina remarked, "I'm sure you did what you could." She gave him a little smile and nodded, saying, "But there's no way we can prove he's some spy, which is not at all true. But we do know that he's Naruto 100%. "Thanks Kushina. I've already informed Inoichi and Ibiki not to let this information leak out, however I'll have to pull Jiraiya and his team out of that mission." Kushina paused her ramen and shot Minato a disbelieving glance. "What are you talking about, Minato?" Minato rubbed his jaw and sighed. With a somber expression on her face, Kushina nodded her head and said, "I feel like we won't be finding him, and I also feel like he's already returned to us. Just a bit different." She had vivid memories of the day Naruto vanished. It was dark and cold. No one has the audacity to bother the Hokage with unimportant matters that could wait until later. They were solely concerned with locating Naruto. She then recalled that after the first year, people had started to accept the possibility that Naruto might not survive. All of them had stated that her son would not return. It had been accepted by all. Aside from her, Minato, and the few individuals who had sufficiently known them. After that first year, they decided to stop looking for Naruto, and Konoha gradually started to move on without him. Even though they all knew it wasn't the same, they started to accept it and respect the fact that he would have made a fantastic ninja. She recalled passing store owners and learning that they would prefer Naruto playing tricks on them than having him permanently disappear. Jiraiya and a few other ninja persisted in their efforts to keep Naruto alive after that first year without him. Even with Naruto's return, they continued to search whenever they could and whenever they had free time. Not by having the same hair color and all those little things, but by body and soul. This boy was still Naruto, regardless of who he was or where he was from. He was still Naruto of Konoha. She grinned at her husband, finished her ramen, and put the bowl in the sink, saying, "Yeah, I understand. But now we just have to get him to tell us where he's from." Naruto's head was fixed on the ceiling, but his eyes weren't really on anything. He was starting to feel bothered by that weird dream. He believed it to be true, but... I told you I can't leave, they'll find everyone. He rolled onto his side and squinted at the wall. Why had he had that dream, and what had it all meant? Since the war, he had not experienced such a dream. That was a long time ago, too. However, he was now receiving strange lookalikes that performed strange jutsu on him. In any case, what had that just you done? His subsequent dreams were hazy, but he had that strange dream in which someone was attempting to rid the demon of his peculiar appearance. He was at the academy with one in particular. However, he was aware that it wasn't him. Oi, Naruto. What are you doing? Sitting, what does it look like? Iruka. Sensei said we had to run laps. Yeah, but I'll finish later. Besides, I run all the time with my dad. Oh, really? How about I sit besides you? We can talk about Sakura-chan. Ah, no way. He recalled the boy's gaze on him. He had a hard time getting everyone to give him that look. That boy didn't hate him. They were friends. In actuality, a large number of people joined him, and they didn't stare at him with hatred. Rather, they appeared to be sincere. They all appeared happy that he was a member of their group and never once called him derogatory names. No, they were members of his group. But since it wasn't him, it didn't matter. He enjoyed the sensation of being accepted long ago. However, a small part of him desired for that dream to become his reality. He turned over on his back, shut his eyes, and went into his mindscape, where he was automatically facing the fox. About time, kid. You had me worried that you'd never come here again. After giving the fox a gentle smile, Naruto sat on the water in an Indian manner. Yeah, well, it's been an odd few days and I figured now would be the best time to think about how I talked to Dad. He seems to believe me for the most part, however I just don't know how much of the truth I should tell him. Well, for one thing, kid, don't tell him what actually brought you here. Just tell him you were working on the seal, messed up and ended up here. Naruto shook his head and stuck out his tongue. No 10-year-old I know knows how to create seals, and if they do, what seal could they mess up to end up here? The fox let out a grunt. You have a point, kid. Maybe just tell them you found the seal, it automatically activated, and bam! You ended up here. After giving it careful thought, Naruto bit his lip. It makes sense, and then I wouldn't have to change my name. But what about my life? What do I tell him? Should I tell him that he died in my dimension, or... Don't spread all that, kid. Just tell them they're your parents but just in another dimension. No spreading anything about your past life. Yeah, Naruto said with a moan and a head scratch. Madara, Obito, and whether a war would break out in this dimension were just a few of the many things that needed to be resolved. What's the goal though? I have no knowledge about this dimension and don't know if Madara is plotting. All the more to convince Minato to take you in with him. So that way you can get some intel. We'd also have to find the other Jinchuriki if Madara is a threat in this world. Naruto sighed in agreement and started to relax. He wished he could enjoy his parents while they were with him and that Madara would not exist in this dimension. Naruto was in a room when Minato opened the door. His gaze swept over it, disapproving of the design. Minato still disapproved of the fact that the building Naruto was taken to was primarily for residents who had lost their homes in attacks. Like a cell, the room was drab and closed off. There was a desk and chair in the corner, and a futon for a bed. And there were no windows. How's it going? He asked the blonde sitting in the center of the room, who appeared to be meditating at the moment. Naruto gave Minato a broad smile and raised an eyebrow. Hey, you finally came. I thought you forgot about me. The words made Minato wince. I would always remember. No way, Minato replied, grinning broadly at Naruto. Although Naruto's eyes widened, the boy smiled, and Minato was unable to deny any of it. It's Naruto. Minato approached the shorter blonde, sat next to him, and patted him on the back. Naruto looked at him thoughtfully and grinned broadly, asking, so what are you meditating about? I guess just about home. Although Minato's body tensed, he kept his son from witnessing it. He had spoken with Naruto multiple times, and each time they had become closer. While Naruto would discuss pranks, Minato would share his experiences as a shinobi. Given how near he was to the Naruto he had lost, it only made Minato want to be nearer to him. However, the shorter blonde had never mentioned his house. Talking to Minato about his family, more specifically, the Naruto he had lost, was a little taboo. Minato wanted to avoid coming across as intrusive, but he couldn't help but be a little worried and curious. What about your home? He asked. He didn't want to know a lot about Naruto's parents, but he did want to know about the village where he lived and how it was. He couldn't simply let his son go because he had found him. Quit being so self-centered. It doesn't matter if Naruto wants to go home. Naruto regarded Minato glumly. I'm just thinking about what it'd be like if I never came here. Minato inquired worriedly, what do you mean? Well, I mean, I wondered what people are thinking, if they are worried about where I'm at. I wondered if they ever come looking for me. Naruto was aware that nobody was searching for him, however, he had to portray a 10-year-old boy who suddenly appeared in a strange dimension. His concern for his home had long since left him, but he had to act as though it still existed. Minato inquired, well, what village did you come from? Minato was aware that he belonged to Konoha in some part of the Naruto universe. This Naruto knew Konoha like it was his home, whether it had to do with his son or something spiritual. However, since there was only one Konoha on the planet, that was not feasible. Since the child was only 10 years old, he made an effort to avoid overwhelming Naruto with all the inquiries. How could he possibly know what you're asking him? He is as ignorant as you are. Naruto drew a long breath. There's something I didn't tell you from before. What is it? Perhaps I was mistaken. I can't tell you unless you bring Kushina-chan with you. At that moment, Minato nearly ran out of the room. To get Kushina-chan, however, he made the cautious decision to exit the door. Had Naruto nearly contacted her mother? Minato grinned. He might be able to reunite his family, individually. Jiraiya was amused as she looked down the creek. There was a flash of relief and betrayal in his eyes. Obito asked the white-haired Sannin, why do you think Minato-sama stopped the search? Jiraiya cast a knowing glance at the Obito. He said, beats me. But he was aware that something was wrong. He sensed that something amazing and perilous had just occurred. We'll head home and see what it's all about. Kyuubi. I can't take it, this is idiotic. Calm down. But it's been forever, what if? What if I never see it again? The fox let out a sigh and rolled his red eyes in an attempt to calm his jailer. Since the Yondaime left, the blonde moron had been bouncing around and screaming about, of all things, damn ramen. He worries about ramen when they go to a different dimension. If you think about it, kid, this is actually good for you. You won't be shoving down pure calories down your throat. Despite being an adult, Naruto had a very particular taste in food. Additionally, the fish and vegetables were becoming stale. While on missions, he typically brought his own ramen cups, but if he ran out, he would accept anything. However, 2 weeks had passed without ramen. Naturally, the furball had claimed that this stuff was beneficial for him, even though he was on the verge of death. Whatever, he muttered. As a pea rolled around his plate, he frowned and started prodding at his food. So gross. He got up, opened the door, and set the food on the welcome mat outside. He didn't feel comfortable in a building, despite the fact that it was designed for civilians. After a few years of living in a tent, it had become the norm for him. He now had a room, a desk, and a bed. It was a far cry from the animals and dirt he was surrounded by. He couldn't help but smile as he glanced out the window. He always remembered the same Konoha. Get your ass back in here, idiot. With a scowl, Naruto closed the door. The fox started talking before he could demand an explanation. Don't you remember that redhead doppelganger? Think about what would happen if anyone saw you. This was something Naruto considered. Indeed, he had never given it much thought before. This must have been the dimension of the redhead. However, if his father already had a son in this dimension, why would he treat him like a son? Why would his mother follow suit? Everything was so unclear. You're hopeless brat. Naruto was about to respond when the door was opened. Minato raised an eyebrow at him as Kushina held the plate in her hands. Naruto smiled sheepishly at the taller blonde and scratched the back of his head, asking, Naruto, how come you didn't finish your meal? Ironically, Naruto's stomach growled, I wasn't hungry? Minato simply shook his head and showed up carrying a picnic basket, but Kushina laughed. Kushina went to Naruto's tiny kitchen and said, well, it's a good thing you didn't eat. I was going to make something for us while we talked. Minato said you had something to tell us? The blonde gave a nod. Hoping it was ramen, he asked, what are you making? I'm making my very special ramen. Ramen. Ignoring his parents' shocked expressions, Naruto leapt into the air with a pumped fist. The song he was performing was ramen, 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 ramen. He was dancing the conga. With a radiant smile, Kushina said, well, I'm glad you're excited to eat it. So do you care to tell me the real reason as to why you didn't eat your lunch? As Minato gave Kushina the picnic basket so she could prepare her ramen, Naruto sighed and settled into the desk chair. Naruto attempted to clarify, because it's gross. Back at home I only eat ramen. Minato scowled. He was being fed by whom? Eating only ramen was a recipe for health issues. Naruto would need to learn healthier eating habits from him. However, he was happy that he had not changed. I just want ramen. Kushina pouted a little and remarked, if only I could eat like that again. Minato was aware of his wife's love for ramen, and she used to eat it exclusively when they were younger. However, she was compelled to consume the grains and green veggies as soon as she turned into a shinobi. For a long time, she had detested them. However, in order to become a great ninja you have to eat right. Do you want to become a ninja, Naruto? Kushina had hoped for a yes response. She recalled Naruto's initial excitement and joy upon being brought to the academy. Naruto's response appeared a little hesitant. Of course, but what was the reason behind their treatment of him? Unless his visions were off, they had their own Naruto here. However, Minato had immediately recognized him. He was unable to attend the same school where another Naruto was present. However, given that Itachi had murdered his entire clan, how would he obtain the information he required about the Akatsuki, Madara, and Sasuke? I don't know. Minato scowled as she noticed Naruto's altered attitude. Did his village forbid him from becoming a shinobi? Did someone tell him he couldn't do it? Naruto, I'm sure we can get you into the academy. We'll train in all of the stuff that you missed out on and try to get you into your age group. How does that sound? Confused, Naruto glanced up at Minato. They would have to stop acting as though he was the only Naruto in Konoha and admit that he was from a different dimension. Nevertheless, he chose to accept the offer. It was simply too good to ignore. Sounds great, Naruto exclaimed as his cheerful expression returned. As they continued their conversation, Naruto raised an intriguing query. What's it like being a Kage? The question was considered by Minato. Well, it's very interesting. You get to see ninja from all over the world and learn from them. You also get to see their homes and visit. Naruto wanted to snort. Without a doubt, his father was simplifying things, as the old man Hokage had instructed. There was much more to it than traveling and meeting ninja from around the world. It's more like slaying ninja everywhere. What type of ninja have you two seen? Kushina paused to reflect. Well, I've met ninja from the Sand Village. They have great medic.nin there. Kushina replied. She refused to admit to Naruto that she had detested them because they were conceited brats, but she did acknowledge that their medical kunoichi were incredible. As though recalling a previous battle, Minato remarked, I've seen Kumo ninja, their Rakage's speed and lighting affinity seems endless. They're also very strong. Knowing this to be true, Naruto nodded. One tough cookie was the Rakage. The fact that he had outpaced him in speed at the start of the war still surprises him. Kushina exclaimed, Ah, the ramen is done, as she spread out bowls from her picnic basket. Then she grabbed the bowls of ramen and started filling them. They set up on the floor since there was no dining table. They all exclaimed, Itadakimasu, and started to eat. When it came to ramen, Naruto, being the savage that he was, quickly ranted it down. Kushina gave him a horrified look. Naruto! She yelled out. The boy blinked at her as he stopped, noodles dangling from his mouth. She said to, mind your manners, eat properly. Naruto looked at her puzzledly. He never really learned table manners, but he assumed he knew how because he spent his time as Rokudame hanging around powerful clan leaders. He muttered an apology after he finished the noodles in his mouth and proceeded to eat. Minato made the decision to ask the question that had been bothering him for so long halfway through the meal. He immediately regretted asking, so what village are you from, Naruto? As Naruto abruptly blanched and dropped his ramen to the ground. He said, mainly to himself, oh right, I was going to tell you about that. I'm actually from Konoha. Minato scowled. If a doppelganger of his son had been wandering around his village, he would have recognized it. When the blonde stopped explaining, Kushina questioned, what do you mean, Naruto? I came to this Konoha by accident. You see, I think I'm in a different dimension. Kushina was perplexed. A different dimension? Yeah, back in my Konoha, well, it's not exactly like this one, not anymore. Minato inquired, what happened? Being from a different dimension would simply indicate that Naruto was his son, just not in this one. Naruto lamented, well, Konoha got attacked. Not all of it was a lie. And if anything, Jiraiya taught him to talk about bits of the truth rather than lying. Naruto looked down at his ramen and said, I was trying to help but somehow I ended up in the hospital and I saw Shizun. Chan. I thought I had died because she. And then I was being interrogated and I knew I hadn't died. I didn't mean to come here, I was trying to help my village. Minato observed Naruto's hasty addition of the final section. Do you remember how you ended up here? I remembered old man Hokage telling me about Fuinjutsu. So I tried to do it myself and I had no idea what I was doing, but he said Fuinjutsu was very powerful. So I tried to make something. For Sarutobi Sama to say that to him, he must have been very close to the Sandaime, Minato pondered. Kushina concluded for him, and you ended up here. She was aware that her clan possessed a lot of space time jutsu, but she didn't believe it would be strong enough to transport someone to a different dimension. For his part, Minato was impressed. It was an achievement in and of itself for a 10-year-old to simply tinker with seals and have something happen. However, it didn't seem like Naruto was communicating with him. But for now, follow the story. In private, Naruto exhaled. They appeared to believe his story, but Minato appeared distressed. But you told me yesterday you don't think anyone would be looking for you. Why? Aren't Jiraiya and Kushina-chan there to locate him? Everyone besides the old man Hokage and a few others hated me. Kushina wanted to slap someone across the stomach. Why would they hate you? You're only 10 years old. Naruto looked at them like a sheep. He would deliberately omit the references to Kyuubi and demons, saying, I have a tendency to play pranks, and sometimes they go too far. Minato was aware that the animosity might have extended beyond practical jokes. He nevertheless played along. Ah, well, here I'm sure the villagers will love you, Naruto. Kushina smiled slightly and nodded. But you must have another Naruto here, right? Since everyone I've seen here is in my world, there's gotta be another. You just can't have two Narutos walking around. Minato tried to maintain his smile as Kushina's waned. Naruto, what exactly happened to your parents in your world? Naruto scowled. The shorter blonde's only response to Minato's question was, they died to protect the village. Who were they? Inquired Kushina. Although she was aware, she wished to check with Naruto. Old man Hokage never told me. He just said that they died protecting Konoha and me, but I'm guessing they had to be Uzumaki's. Minato grinned as he turned to face Kushina. In order to protect him, their son was raised with his mother's maiden name rather than with them. Kami seems to have a peculiar way of making our world seem strange. Minato said, Naruto, we're going to be your parents now. Naruto's eyes were filled with tears as he gazed up at them. He gave a gentle nod. Kushina comforted her son by embracing him and saying, there's no need to cry. You have your parents now, and we have our son. Minato stood up to collect the plates. He smiled at his son and said, thank you for cooking Kushina-chan. And thanks for telling us about this Naruto. Naruto was unable to control his emotions. His parents had never been with him. Having grown up alone, he now had the opportunity to start over with his parents. Regarding the other Naruto, that was the only unanswered question. He pondered that, but since he knew what had happened, he chose not to speak. His dreams and the way his parents treated him were gradually beginning to make sense. In the hopes that Naruto wouldn't find it too much, Minato proposed, well, let's get cleaned up and try to get you out of here so can come with us. Knowing what it was like to be an orphan, he hoped Naruto would be more approachable like him rather than withdrawn like some of the other children at the orphanage. After giving his father a quick glance, Naruto leapt into the air and gave another triumphant fist pump. Ramen, and now this? This is the best day ever. Please tell me you are not reverting back to that childish brat you once were. Being a childish brat was enjoyable. Both Kushina and Minato grinned broadly at his son. Their family was back at last. Naruto quickly gathered his belongings from his room. Other than a few clothes, he had very little. Other than some cash, which was returned to him in his original toad wallet, he had nothing with him since traveling to this new dimension. No matter how juvenile people criticized that wallet, he would never change it. Knowing he was going to employ the Flying Thunder God technique, Naruto complied with Minato's advice. Alright Naruto, you're going to have to hold on tight. Like the first time he did it, it was quite traumatic if you weren't ready for it. While Naruto gripped his arm, Kushina gripped Minato's right arm. Minato said, here we go. Suddenly, they found themselves inside a house. Minato cast a worried glance down at Naruto. When he first used the technique on people, they typically puked. That was awesome! Exclaimed Naruto. He had never applied his father's method in this manner. It was typically used for short-distance travel on the battlefield. Minato and Kushina both looked at Naruto in surprise. They appeared to be using the same energy ball as before. Kushina let out an exuberant, alright Naru-chan, I'll show you your room. Despite being aware of the nickname, Naruto remained silent. It pleased him. As she showed him the estate, which was smaller than other estates, she practically tore his arm off with her hand. There were just 3 living rooms, 4 bathrooms, and 7 bedrooms. Additionally, there were 2 kitchens, 1 downstairs and 1 upstairs. After showing him the library, Kushina informed him that he would be studying ninja-related topics. After that, she gave him a tour of Minato's office and tea room, where she discussed feminine topics with other women. He asks any more questions. After that, they arrived at his room. Naruto twisted the knob open and was astounded by what he saw. Okay, Naru-chan. Go ahead and open the door. Compared to the Hokage suite at the Hokage Tower, this was superior. His bed was covered with a large collection of stuffed foxes and toads. He saw that there was a weapon rack with a seal on his wall. A desk containing the necessary study materials was present, as was a small bookcase filled with books he had never heard of and scrolls. But he couldn't resist reaching out and grabbing the one he saw there. He muttered to himself, the tale of the utterly gutsy shinobi. Kushina gave him a startled look. In his world, he would have read this book. She recalled the day Jiraiya gave it to him for the first time on his 9th birthday. It was their first birthday without him. Do you know of it? Inquired Kushina. He acknowledged, I used to read it all the time. He read it constantly while he was Hokage, of course. Why wouldn't he read his sensei and godfather's memory constantly? In addition, the book was excellent. He grinned up at Kushina and put the book back on the shelf. I love this room. Thanks, he exclaimed. Kushina smiled warmly at him. Kushina hurried off after saying, now go ahead and rest up, we have training to do tomorrow. Naruto gave her a wide-eyed stare. He would be able to train at last. I don't see how can this get any better. Since he was the Hokage, Minato couldn't exactly stay in his house, so he left hours before he truly wanted to. While he went to do paperwork, he was envious of Kushina's ability to spend the entire day with Naruto. It was exhausting. But he had to perform his duties or else nobody else would. He sighed and went to work. Although he didn't particularly enjoy the cold, he didn't always use the flying thunder god technique. As a child, he didn't like it and detested the fact that it somehow appeared in Konoha. He simply applied his method to reach the tower. Katsu, the secretary, looked at him dryly, he said, Sandame. Sama is here. Why does everyone in Nara always seem so bored? But some of those fangirls weren't as good as the Nara. He trembled. Thanks Katsu. The disinterested boy nodded and started fiddling with his pencil. In fact, Minato had become enamored with the bored boy. The boy had good intentions, despite the fact that he always found things problematic. His ability to think clearly would help him achieve his goals. Sarutobi was examining the photos on his desk when Minato walked into his office. He had a serious expression on his face. Morning Yondaime. Sama. Morning Sandame. Sama. Sarutobi sighed as he glanced up at the blonde. It seems I will be taking over here since the Raikage has called for a Hokage summit. Minato's gaze grew stony. Although he had never been to a summit before, he thought it would be extremely risky. A period when adversaries might attempt to harm my village. I see, he replied. He thought he could train his son and spend some time with him. That was going to have to wait. You may want to say goodbye to your wife, and I'm guessing you might want to grab Kakashi to take him with you to your summit? Minato gave a head nod. Minato informed him, Jiraiya and the rest of the search team should be returning in a few days. Sarutobi looked at him curiously but remained silent. He did what Minato thought was right. He wouldn't give his hat to someone he didn't think was capable of making sensible choices. Well then you should be on your way. With a note stating that her husband had departed for a Kage summit, Kushina had woken up alone. They had just gotten their son back, but he would have to wait a few weeks to see him again, which made her scowl a little. After getting ready that morning, she went to wake Naruto so he could begin his training, but the blonde energy ball was already awake and in the library rather than his room. He was deeply focused on a book, and when she saw the title, she scowled. The Fundamentals of Fuinjutsu. She pondered whether he was looking for a way home. She attracted her son's attention by clearing her throat. He grinned foxily as he looked up at her. Morning. Good morning Naru-chan. What are you reading? Stuff about Fuinjutsu. The blonde mused to himself. I already know all of this. However, he needed to make his story plausible. I want to learn more about it. Sounds reasonable enough. How about you go wash up and eat breakfast and I'll help with it, she replied. Naruto leapt from his chair and grinned broadly. Okay. The speed at which Naruto was picking things up surprised Kushina. Although she was not her husband's master, it appeared that her son would be. He grasped the character and sealing concepts with ease. Additionally, he had used a low D-rank sealing technique, which is used to seal small items like food. She praised Naru-chan, saying, Great job. Now let's go get some sun in the backyard. I'm sure you want to learn something else, right? Naruto grinned broadly. Yup. Naruto saw that it was snowing as they were leaving. Kushina let out a sigh. It has been snowing on and off for 2 whole weeks. I wonder what it could be. Kushina had made sure to send the Anbu away, and they set out equipped. She wanted them to avoid seeing Naruto just yet. Alright, so tell me what you know about chakra. Well, it's essential to every being. It is the spiritual energy within that is needed to do even the most basic jutsu. Replied Naruto. In response to his response, Kushina nodded her head. And how do you channel it? Through hand signs. But some ninja don't need hand signs to do it. Kushina grinned. Naruto appeared to know more than she had assumed. Yep. Some ninja who don't use hand signs to channel their chakra can't use hand signs. Naruto tilted his head sideways. That was something he was unaware of. Kushina laughed at his bewildered expression. It's hereditary, Naruto, but the reason you don't see that in a lot of ninja is because it's a recessive trait. Meaning most people use hand signs because it's not in their blood not to use signs. That made sense, so Naruto nodded his head. So it's like writing. Most people write with right hand because it comes natural, while some people write with left because it's natural to them. Kushina, unaware that Naruto was not perspiring, said, Yep, now I have the recessive trait, so it may be hard for you to follow me if you've been using hand signs for a long time, but it's a good thing you're young. Or else this would be harder for you. It was just my luck, Naruto reflected. Well, what if I become comfortable with hand signs? Kushina gave a blink. Kushina abruptly produced a slip of paper and said, Well, you are my son. You should pick up my style pretty quickly since I know an easier way of showing it. Naruto immediately understood what he had to do. Types of chakras. Here, just hold the paper and send some chakra into it, she replied. As before, Naruto followed instructions, and the paper split in two. Kushina grinned broadly. So you have the wind efficiency. Now we can begin the training. Have you done chakra control before, Naru-chan? Naruto nodded. Jiraiya's exercises were something he detested. It had been brutal from the old man. Great, we don't have to waste time with that. Naruto looked at her bewilderedly. You mean I don't need really good chakra control for this? Kushina shook her head and laughed. This is an Uzumaki technique passed down from generation to generation. Because of our massive chakra reserves, we don't need the best chakra control for most of our jutsus. Naruto let out a sigh of relief. Thank you, Kami. Let's get going now. Naruto, whose mother was a slave driver, was panting on the ground, his throat dry and his body aching from the most rigorous training he had ever undergone, including being flung off a cliff. The kunoichi hadn't perspired, and Kushina was grinning as she stood over Naruto. He pondered why, given his mother's strength, he hadn't heard more about her. Naruto, you've gotten pretty far in your training, but now it's time to head back inside. An additional round? He pleaded, since he genuinely wanted to master the technique. Alright, just one more round. Naruto thought his mother was going to teach him a jutsu, but instead she taught him a fighting style that had been handed down through the Uzumaki clan's generations and was more difficult than he had anticipated. He stumbled a little when he stood up, but his mother simply stood there and helped him get into position. He took a deep breath and made the appropriate hand signals, causing air to form around his hand. He started to bend the wind, like chakra, so that if he hit his opponent, it would rip through the skin, and if he missed, he could blast the opponent from a great distance. However, the chakra was difficult to hold. It wasn't like a Rasengan where he'd hold for only a couple of seconds. He'd have to hold it for the duration of the battle, and it would blister his hands. His mother had said that it was like bending the elements to make them with you. He ran at his mother after she effortlessly pumped the chakra into her hands, stomped her foot on the ground, and the earth she stepped on suddenly appeared. He avoided it, pumped more chakra into his hands, and used his wind to blow the earth away. She then threw a piece of earth at his blind sight, which he barely avoided. She effortlessly defeated him by combining her earth, manipulating techniques with taijutsu, and she wasn't even exerting herself. Naruto, on the other hand, was a different story. He was trapped and had nowhere to go after his mother built 4 walls around him, proving that manipulating wind was more difficult than she had claimed. His taijutsu had also suffered because he was only 10 years old and his body wasn't built to move in different ways. The most he could do was dodge a few rocks that she threw at him. Naruto, we'll begin anew tomorrow. You need some rest right now, she said, her voice tinged with worry. But before he could respond, he passed out from exhaustion. He was just like me when I first learned, Kushina sighed. She had to bandage his wounds, so she picked him up and rushed him back inside. He's the same stubborn boy I remembered him being. As the doorbell abruptly rang, Kushina put Naruto in bed and gave him a quick kiss on the forehead. Returning to the living room, Kushina said, Yes? When Kushina opened the door, he said. Itachi and Sasuke were standing directly behind Makoto Uchiha, who was grinning slightly. I apologize for interrupting you, Kushina. Sama, but my husband's police force has taken over my house, she said. You know, a boys' night out. Recalling Minato's comrade's invasion of her home, Kushina said, Tell me about it, come on in. Looking at the redhead's attire, Itachi remarked, I see you have been training Kushina. Sama. The Uchiha only assumed that she was wearing her training appropriate kunoichi outfit. She shrugged and went into the kitchen, saying, "Well yeah, but it was too cold so I didn't do much." "Can I go to the bathroom?" Sasuke inquired. "You remember where it is, right?" Kushina said, nodding and grinning at the Uchiha. Sasuke nodded, knowing where everything was because he was Naruto's best friend, even though he hadn't been over in a year. He eventually located the restroom and opened the door after walking down the hallway, but it appeared that he had forgotten its location because it was Naruto's room. He was in another cave, but this one was a vivid orange. The swirling walls were softly illuminated by the torches that hung on the walls. He was chilled by the subtle odor of death and poison that pervaded the air. This was a place he knew. Sasuke. He started to move through the cave's corridors, where he recalled Sasuke was hiding. He recalled that when he had first arrived here, the adrenaline had surged through him like a water hose, but he was exhausted. The pain in his hands was familiar, and his shoulders drooped forward. As he examined the blisters on his palms, he thought, training with mom. Although he was aware that this was a different vision, he didn't believe that his present condition would be carried over. No matter how hard he tried in the past, he was never able to assist in the visions, so it's not like he would be fighting anyhow. He lingered in the strangely shaped corridors, trying to recall where he had previously located Sasuke. Naturally, he wouldn't, as his only concern at the moment was locating Sasuke. He hadn't even thought about how the cave was laid out. He was curious as to how his doppelganger had discovered this location and chosen to show it to him. Was it also a part of the past of the other Naruto? Would he finally receive answers here? Despite his lack of knowledge, he chose to keep looking. Even though it would be pointless, he felt compelled to open doors. The door in front of him was a shoddy wooden construction. Could hear voices inside, but they were faint. He pressed his ear against the door and focused intently on trying to understand what they were saying. This is boring. You're supposed to be awesome. I thought we were going to train. Patience, you too. If you want to become the best ninja, you have to patience. We've been having patience for the last hour and a half. I'm done with this meditation stuff. Come on, Naruto. Naruto's eyes widened as he removed his ear from the door and pondered for a while whether or not to open it. This must not have been in his memory. He never hung out with Sasuke and Itachi. In actuality, he was typically only with one or the other in dire circumstances, such as when they were attempting to murder one another. He opened the door slowly, curious to see what else would happen. And it was just an empty room, much to his dismay. The realization made Naruto's heart sink. This game is really sick, Naruto mused to himself. It's not even me. He kept walking and listening to the various conversations at the doors, each with its own significance. Most of the time, they just talked, but occasionally they would argue. All those conversations sounded good. Perhaps they would be like them if he had spoken to Sasuke prior to their rivalry. So perhaps I wouldn't need to come here. When he opened a second door, the room was once more empty. Even though he was aware of the outcome, he still had to make sure. Perhaps he could see the life he had always desired if he could only catch a glimpse. After retreating once more, he eventually reached the end. His initial encounter with Sasuke following his departure from the village. In a whisper, he called out, "Sasuke?" When he stepped outside, he noticed the trash all over the place. Then he raised his head. He did something, but Sasuke was not present. Voices. He ascended the debris, slipping a couple of times but always getting back up. It was a challenging ascent because he occasionally had nothing to cling to. Additionally, the voices grew farther away each time he slipped and fell back to the ground. He yelled a little louder, "Sasuke!" He felt his hand blisters getting worse as he tried and tried. They started to bleed. He didn't care, though. Whatever was up there, he knew it was worth seeing. He had to see it. Thus, he ascended again, clutching the rocks and squirming in agony as they penetrated his already exposed flesh. After reaching the summit, he attempted to pull himself up, but there was nothing to grasp. All that grew around his hands were weeds and dead grass. Then it dawned on him. Whatever it was at the top, he would never see it. His strength was gone. His body no longer possessed any power. "I didn't think you were one to quit, Naruto." His heart fell and his eyes grew wide as he looked up at the voice. Light green eyes and pink hair gave him an almost accusing look. "Come on, don't you want to join us?" "Sakura-chan?" The girl stepped back, her brow furrowed. The tiny Sakura said, Stop being so emotional, Naruto." She looked at him as though he were perfectly normal, and she had a red bow in her hair. As if he weren't the unexpected Naruto that appeared. He gazed at the pinkette's extended hand for a long time. She frowned and said, "Do you really want to go back down there? I thought you came here to be with us again." Taking his hand, Naruto saw how tiny it had grown. In contrast to his typical visions, he was now a child. He would be his complete adult self in others. He looked at her puzzledly as she yanked him up with a huff. "Who is us?" The tiny Sakura smiled and gestured outward. "Let's go." They continued to walk through what appeared to be a very hazardous dark forest. He pondered whether he had been barred from this secret location as a child. Sakura seemed to assume he would know where to go. Then, as they got closer to a clearing where the forest ended, she started running. She exclaimed, "Hey guys, I found him." Fearful of becoming lost, he ran beside her. A bubbly sensation entered his chest as he emerged from the shadowy forest and entered the clearing. Since the day he saved Konoha, he had not experienced this emotion. Everyone rallied in spite of the devastation his village had endured, and he was at last accepted. The Konoha 11. They were all having a great time running around in their tiny bodies, not even giving a damn about what people thought of them. In reality, the distant Neji was grinning, but Naruto just stared in awe. It was a tragic day the last time he saw Neji smile. With a broad smile, Naruto hesitated when he caught a glimpse of something. Blue eyes, whiskers, and blonde hair. He was playing, laughing, smiling, and generally happy with the Konoha 11. And he was the one. It was him, not a red-haired boy who had the life he had always desired, and that boy started to fade very slowly. The pinkette waved him over and exclaimed, "Hey, are you just gonna stand there or are you going to join us?" He didn't need to reconsider. He grinned broadly as he ran over there, but something stopped him. "What about what they did to me, Tuss? I thought you came here to stop it from happening again. Pathetic. What about our village, our friends, our parents?" When Naruto turned around, he saw a boy crying in a crowd of red hair. He made a valiant attempt to wipe the tears from his eyes, but they kept coming back. The boy looked up with beseeching eyes, his red hair changing color, and said, "Please, help me. I want to help you too. I want to stop it from happening too." Blonde. Slowly, the whisker lines spread across his face. As Naruto moved away from the sobbing boy, a fear that he had never experienced before surfaced inside of him. He noticed that the Konoha 11 had vanished and that a darkening cloud was passing over them when he looked over his shoulder. Naruto chose to console the boy as his sobs became more intense. The boy started to resemble his doppelganger more and more as they got closer. Naruto smiled brightly at the boy and put a hand on his shoulders. "Hey, it's okay. I'll help, believe it." But Naruto did not receive the answer he was hoping for. The boy's eyes were only desperate as he looked up at him. "You have to save them all. You have to get his spirit out of there." "What are you talking about? They've already got me. They're going to come after you next." "What the hell are you talking about? They Kyuubi Naruto. They want your half of the Kyuubi." Before Naruto could even ask, the boy gradually vanished. "Wait, you mean Adatsuki?" A slip of paper caught Naruto's attention as he examined the location where the boy had disappeared. They appeared remarkably familiar and were coordinates. Although Sasuke Uchiha was not a big believer in ghosts and demons, he assumed he might be shown to be mistaken. Sasuke felt pressure in the room just by looking at it, and a tiny voice in his head told him to turn around because there was nothing there. He heard a much larger voice telling him to look around the room. If he looked inside and simply recalled some memories, he wouldn't exactly be upsetting anyone. So quickly, he entered and sniffed the aroma. It had a terrible ramen smell, not just from the spices used, but also as if someone had just brought fresh ramen into the room the previous evening. What a strange thing. He started by going through the closet and remembering that the room had been spotless the last time he had seen it. So why were shoes haphazardly thrown inside and clothes strewn all over the floor? A shiver went up Sasuke's back. Who could it be that had been here? The clothing Naruto previously owned was donated. The hangers now held fresh clothing. They were in a state of great tatter. They were outdated, out of style, and unrelated to modern fashion. It simply meant that someone had put them there for a 10-year-old boy, not that he cared. A 10-year-old boy was reported dead a year after going missing 2 years prior. His stomach fell, and he sincerely hoped that Hokage, Sama and Kushina, Sama weren't acting as though Naruto had returned. As usual, he made his room smell like ramen and was untidy, putting garments on the hangers. He turned to go after taking a trembling breath, but he saw that the door was closed. He had never closed it. As he looked around the room, he noticed that there were numerous plush toys all over the place and that the bed linens were thrown carelessly on the ground. It was obvious that he hadn't seen anyone in the bed. Why is there a person in the bed? Even though he rolled his eyes at himself, he continued to look into it. They closed the door when, wouldn't he have heard? As if crossing a street, he opened the door and glanced quickly in both directions. Then he made the decision not to return downstairs. He thought Itachi was waiting for him since he could hear his mother and Kushina Sama laughing. Itachi would have undoubtedly tried to stop him from calling the older brother. With his back to the other direction, he scowled as his breath caught in his throat. Itachi looked at him apathetically and said dryly, "Little brother." Sasuke yelled, "What?" and Itachi let out a sigh. Since Naruto was pronounced dead, Sasuke had been a grouch, as the elder had observed. He became distant from everyone in the academy and would yell and fuss at their parents. "They get how I feel, you'd never understand," he said, referring to the Hokage and his wife as the only people he truly respected. But that was an entirely false statement. The hyperactive boy had been his partner. He seemed to have gained a younger sibling. He had also cried for the boy. He always taught them those bizarre and boring meditation techniques because losing a younger brother was their greatest fear. He was aware that they would both be excellent ninjas and that they both desired to become such. But if you froze on every mission, you couldn't be a great ninja. Therefore, they would be able to overcome their fear of dying on their first life-threatening mission if they learned those breathing and meditation techniques. He had witnessed it firsthand to his teammate, who had been eager for action but was immobilized as soon as it occurred due to the leaked killing intent of their adversaries. Although the boy survived, he would never be able to carry out another mission. His greatest fear was realized when Naruto was pronounced dead. He wished he could have looked for him, but he was too young to do so, so he was left to mourn the news along with everyone else. Naturally, Sasuke vowed to exact revenge on those responsible for Naruto's kidnapping and death. His brother had even gone so far as to claim that, once he gained strength, he would turn into a missing nin in order to exact his revenge. Itachi tried not to be affected by the amount of hate that erupted from Sasuke's fiery eyes as she gazed into them. "Do you still have to go to the bathroom?" Sasuke stumbled a little, as though he had forgotten. He had, too. To be honest, he came up here to use the bathroom. He blushed and nodded as he rushed to the closest restroom, where Itachi waited for him before they went back downstairs to listen to their mother and Kushina discussing dinner plans. Oh no, Sasuke pondered in his mind. Kushina Sama and his mother were fierce rivals. Additionally, they had developed a rivalry over housewifery since they both became housewives. Dinners are included. Additionally, the judge is typically a member of the other person's family. Therefore, the Hokage Sama and typically Naruto would judge his mother if she brought dinner. Furthermore, Naruto and Hokage Sama were typically too blind to recognize its competitive element. The following day, Naruto would typically gripe about his mother's lack of interest. It was painfully obvious that Naruto had praised his mother's cooking, so Sasuke would roll his eyes and call him adobe, which was not what Kushina Sama desired. The way best friends were was strange. Additionally, Itachi would claim that he and Naruto were identical. Ever since birth, Kushina and his mother have set them against one another in ridiculous games like See Who Can Walk First, which Sasuke won, and Who Can Eat All Their Food, which Naruto won. As the boys grew older, they constantly engaged in these competitions because it had stuck with them. Who can perform the most push-ups, who can hit the target with their kunai with accuracy, and, most entertaining of all, who can annoy Iruka-sensei the most. Itachi observed his mother's excitement at the prospect of dinner. "Sounds great, Kushina-chan. What time tonight?" Kushina scowled. "Not tonight, Makoto-chan. I'd like for all the clan heads and their children to be there." Itachi's mom appeared in disbelief. If Kushina Sama wanted all the clan heads to come, it must have been crucial. He was aware that not all of the clan heads were particularly liked by the redhead Kunoichi. She was saying something. Then, when she invited them to dinner, Itachi could only conclude from the invitation that this was no bothersome competition. With a broad smile on her face, Kushina said, "Of course Itachi and Sasuke are invited." Sasuke frowned slightly as he glanced up at his brother. He assumed that adults would be the only ones involved, but he surmised that even in the presence of children, adults did have a way of keeping secrets. And he had assumed that the other kids had been invited if Itachi and he were already invited. Oh no, he pondered. The girls were really annoying, but it wasn't that he didn't like the other kids. Makoto stood up and stretched before saying, "Well, I'm all up for going. I'll see when Fugaku will be able to take time off and contact you." Itachi scowled as he glanced up the stairs, sensing something was amiss. He thought he caught a glimpse of something, possibly a long, tanned leg entering Naruto's room, out of the corner of his eye. Sasuke appeared to see the same thing when he looked back at his brother. He looked reassuringly at the younger Uchiha, but his stomach twisted and flipped inside. There was something wrong here, and he had to find out what it was. "Itachi!" Sasuke yelled into the shadowed space. He could enter since there was a shuffle inside. He followed through, and Itachi quickly lit 2 candles, illuminating the room. The older brother gave the younger a demeaning look. When Sasuke noticed that his brother was prepared as though embarking on a mission, he became extremely perplexed. He looked at Itachi curiously. He said plainly, "I'm going out on a mission." Sasuke frowned as he glanced over his brother and said, "You didn't go to the tower and there were no messenger birds that came this way. It's not like I'd tell Mom AMD Dad." In a low voice, Itachi stated, "I wasn't assigned this mission. Besides you'd nagged to come with." Sasuke gave an eye roll. Itachi gave Sasuke a chilly look, and the younger one merely grinned. "In any case, I'll find out. Just like I found out about Hana. I believe that time you used the 'I'm training' excuse." Itachi sighed in frustration. Even if his brother was everything to him, he would still feel like snapping his neck because he was so annoying. "Fine. Gear up." Sasuke went to retrieve all of his shinobi equipment after performing a little victory jump that he had learned from Naruto. After 20 minutes while their father was away at a council meeting and their mother was fast asleep, Itachi and Sasuke sneaked out. Sasuke drew attention to himself when he stumbled on the level ground, but it was very easy to slip out of their estate. "Oof!" Itachi exclaimed as he watched his brother stand up. "Oi! Is that Sasuke?" Itachi clung to the tree and leapt back. He made the decision to leave Sasuke since he had effectively blackmailed him and would be bothersome. Itachi snickered to himself as he crept over the gate. Dumb little brother. Sasuke looked up at the figure that ran towards him, his face bewildered, realizing that his brother was no longer there. He stayed outside and cursed the god up there who had brought this about. Sasuke spat, "What do you want, Aiko?" Giving Sasuke one of those infuriating smiles that made him think of the Dobi, Aiko said, "I thought it was you." He asked enthusiastically, "What are you doing out here?" Sasuke moaned as he glanced at the gate that Itachi must have hopped. "Well, it looks like my plans have changed. You." Aiko looked sheepishly at Sasuke. "Sneaking out to the fields for some fresh air. You're already outside." Aiko laughed uncomfortably. "Guess you're right." Sighing, Sasuke pushed himself to his feet and brushed the dirt from his new shinobi outfit. His tone was assertive as he said, "I'll tag along." "Sure. Hey you think you can keep this from my mom? This is supposed to be the last straw." Sasuke shrugged as Aiko burst out laughing again. Making promises he wasn't sure he could keep was something he always detested. However, Aiko appeared to accept the shrug, and they both left through the gate. Naruto turned to face his mother resolutely. Although the normally green grass was padded by white snow and a strong wind was blowing, he was sweating profusely and his hands were blistered. Even though his mother was panting, it wasn't as bad as his. She waited for him to approach her in a combat stance. She appeared shocked that he had gotten better after only 5 bowls of ramen and a little sleep. He smirked broadly and made a beeline for her. She questioned whether he was holding back yesterday because of the increase in his speed. He was considerably faster, almost as fast as a Jonin. Unless, once more, he was holding back. She barely avoided the wind strike that Naruto threw at her. Then he hit her again, pumping wind out of his hand so that she would be hit whether she dodged or not. A large earthen wall deflected the attack long enough for Kushina to move to a safe distance away after she stomped on the ground. But as soon as the wind touched the earth wall, it broke. Kushina hurled 3 pieces of earth at her son in a hurry. As 2 pieces of earth struck Naruto's back, she saw how weak his defense was. The third would leave a nasty bruise, but he was able to block it. With a slight wince, Naruto launched another attack on her. Kushina attempted to avoid as much as she could, but 2 wind blades struck her right away. She observed that he concentrated more on large-scale attacks than on smaller ones. Poor control of the chakras? She pondered. As Kushina started striking him with several pieces of earth, Naruto appeared irritated. He must not be accustomed to spending so much time away from his opponent. She scowled. If his career as a shinobi was just getting started, he shouldn't have fallen into such habits. "Naruto, I think that's enough. You've got a good handle on this so far. And that speed of yours is way beyond that of a beginner." Kushina heaped praise on her son. He nodded and smiled painfully at her. "Thanks." In order to bandage him, Kushina gestured him inside. She had no idea that Itachi was intently observing, his face expressionless. Telling her to tell the Anbu to go to their homes wasn't the best course of action. Now, however, he understood why. Itachi whispered to himself, "This is a big secret, Kushina. Sama. I hope no one else finds out besides myself." With a cunning smile, Sasuke took his place. He didn't care that a lot of sweat was streaming down his face. They were tied at the end of the game's last round. His team would win if they were able to score another goal. "Hey Aiko, I've got a plan." His awkward cousin, Aiko, hurried huffily toward him. With a hint of mischief in his eyes, he exclaimed excitedly, "Do tell." Although Aiko initially gave off the impression of being kind and completely dim, he was actually a master manipulator. He essentially lived off of tricks and manipulation, and naturally, it kind of rubbed off on him. "Sakura seems to be head over heels with you, right?" he inquired. Aiko frowned and blushed a little. "She likes you, Sasuke." Sasuke huffed out a breath and rolled his eyes, "But she likes you too, idiot." "Really? That's shocking. Would ever just listen up." They were engaging in a pleasant game of hide and seek, naturally with a shinobi twist. Aiko gave Sasuke a cheerful nod and a bright smile. "How'd you get so smart, Sasuke?" After a brief moment of blanching, Sasuke simply brushed it off. It was always Aiko's pleasure to irritate others. "Let's go find our pinkhead before you trip." Searching for the girl, Sasuke and Aiko dispersed. She wasn't particularly skilled in any jutsu, but she was intelligent, so he knew she would be the easiest to get. That appeared to be the main issue. He frowned as he looked around the floor. He kept thinking about what it would be like to have his best friend by his side. In this game, they would dominate everyone. Shikamaru would be their main rival if he weren't so incredibly lazy. Sasuke looked everywhere, but the pinkhead was nowhere to be found. He sighed in frustration as he settled down on the snowy path, but then he heard a sound in the distance. "Billboard. Brow, move aside, you're taking up all the space." "Whatever, pig. You guys just ruined everyone's cover." "Shut up, dog breath. This is so troublesome." Sasuke pivoted and observed the individuals emerging from the enormous, elongated bush. Sakura, Ino, Shikamaru, and Kiba all emerged wearing annoyed expressions. "We could have won too if you two hadn't been bickering," Kiba yelled. Seeing Kiba without the white fur dog was strange. Aiko suddenly appeared and said, "Damn, so this means that we can't do what we were planning?" Sasuke gave him a fierce look. "What? You knew they were here this whole time?" Aiko laughed mischievously and said, "Oh, yeah, I was supposed to tell you." The entire time, he intended to let them win. Sasuke looked away from his cousin and said, "HN." He looked up at the sky, and a sigh came out of his mouth. Aiko remarked, "I wonder if it'll snow again. If it does, it just means that the academy will be closed for another week." Kiba sulked. "Man, why did it have to snow anyways? It's only fall." Sakura gave the dog Nin a scowl. Sasuke could hear her murmuring, "I like it." Even he enjoyed the snow. He felt nostalgic even though it was his first time seeing snow 2 weeks prior. Shikamaru said, "Good game, Uchiha. I'm heading out, this is a drag," and left for home. In an attempt to catch up to the slothful Nara, Kiba ran as well. Ino's cheeks were slightly flushed as she turned to face Sasuke. "Do you think you can walk me home, Sasuke-kun?" Sasuke grimaced in his mind. The way girls could go from being angry at their best friends to being kind and serene was frightening. Sure?" Aiko was staring at the pinkhead when he turned to face her. Sakura appeared somewhat let down. Aiko appeared to have seen through his white lie. To be honest, he didn't know if the girl liked him in that way. The only reason he said it was to win. However, he wouldn't have because he was unaware of the slim chance that she might have liked him. As Aiko waved goodbye and made his way to the Uchiha estate, a twinge of guilt pulled at him. "Aiko, how about you walk Sakura-chan home?" Aiko complied with a smile on his face as the girl appeared to get excited at this. As he lay in bed, Naruto gazed up at the popcorn ceiling. He was really thinking of just asking his mother if he could come out of hiding. It felt like everything stopped when he saw Sasuke. Sasuke and his family were present. A part of him wanted to scream at the Ravenet and tackle him for everything that had transpired. He did, however, recall that he was a different Naruto and that Sasuke. He continued to worry a little that he wouldn't be accepted. He had experienced the same issue previously, of course, but this time it was different. He had a fresh start, however, there was still another issue. "That doppelganger of yours, Kit, he's going to cause some trouble." Naruto took a deep swallow. "Those coordinates though, why would he go there? I mean, does it mean that they extracted his part of the Kyuubi? I'm guessing so, and he probably died from it. Like Gaara, but without a Chiyo to save him." "But they're 6 years too early," exclaimed Naruto, perplexed. "It's a whole different world, Naruto." With a sigh, Naruto looked up at the ceiling. "Would I now have to save Gaara? But how can I get in touch with him? He's acting rather homicidally at the moment, if I recall correctly. We were friends back then." He closed his eyes and flipped to his side. "I don't mean to put any pressure on you, but what about the other Jinchuriki? If anything, you'd have to get to the Mizukage now since he's most likely under Madara's influence." Naruto scowled. He had to assemble all of the Jinchuriki in order to try to save Sasuke and stop Madara once more. This is going to be one hell of a journey. Minato ascended the stairs, glad to have reached the top at last. He wished he could be home with his wife and son right now because he was cold and exhausted, but he hoped the Raikage's topics of conversation had nothing to do with war. Given everything that was going well for him, he didn't need another one to find its way to him. The door was heavily guarded, but Iwa Nin ignored them despite their icy glares, understanding that any hostile action could potentially lead to another conflict. Kakashi continued to glare at him as the guards opened the door for him. He saw that everyone had already arrived. His gaze immediately went to the stranger seated at the table. Everybody but the Mizukage had caught his attention. The young boy appeared regal as he sat tall. He had wondered if it was the Bakugan because his pale purple eyes looked so much like the Hyugas, but he quickly dismissed the idea as he sat down next to the Kage, who he wasn't particularly pleased with and who also didn't seem particularly pleased at the expression on his face. The Raikage turned to face the youthful Mizukage and said, "So everyone is here, let's start the meeting." Minato was still taken aback by his youthful appearance. "Mizukage, what would you like to share with the other Kages?" Minato scowled. He was hoping he could resolve his disagreement with the Raikage, and he had assumed this meeting was about whatever disputes the man had with everyone in this room. Perhaps make some kind of truce. Nevertheless, he paid attention to the boy's words. "I'll get this straight to the point," he said obligingly. "I am the container of the Sandy Biju." Minato's breath caught in his throat a little, but unlike the Kage, he avoided giving the boy any obnoxious looks. He was aware of the impact that burden had had on his son and wife. With a hint of bitterness, he added, "And because of this I have a link with the other Biju. However, that link has been tainted. Something is wrong with one of the Biju." The Tsuchikage yelled, "Why should it be of concern to us?" Half of Minato wanted to tear the man's beard off his face. The Mizukage gave the Tsuchikage a stoic expression, as though displaying some kind of temperamental dominance. "The link shows that one Biju has disappeared, which wouldn't be of concern if it wasn't for the nature of the disappearance." With his arms crossed over his chest, the Kage questioned, "So, isn't it a good that a Biju disappeared?" The Mizukage gave an eye roll. "It's a concern because if a Biju disappears then it should also be gone along with the Jinchuriki." The Tsuchikage remarked, "This sounds like nonsense. Once again, why is it a concern to us?" "It's a concern because a Biju's power should not just disappear off the face of the earth. It means someone took it, and is plotting to use it in one way or another. Meaning that if you don't protect the Jinchuriki." The Tsuchikage snapped and turned his nose away from the group, saying, "So this is some lousy attempt to get us to protect those demons." Peeved, "Mizukage, please don't embarrass yourself any further. I believe a break is needed." With a nod, the Kages rose from their seats. Despite appearing a little concerned, the Raikage and his guards left. Minato remained seated, examining the Mizukage. He pondered whether Naruto was involved in this. "Mizukage. Sama?" The slightly agitated Mizukage asked, looking up at Minato. "Which Biju went missing?" Minato shivered a little when the boy gave the Hokage a very cocky grin despite appearing shocked by the question. He only said, "I think you know, Hokage. Sama," before getting up and leaving on his own. Minato turned to face Kakashi, who appeared to be quite perplexed. He would have tell his student about Naruto's return in one way or another. With a sigh, he stood up and devised a strategy. He would need to persuade the other Kages to accept the Mizukage. Naruto went back to his room with a sigh. He hadn't seen Sasuke in a few days, so he was shocked that the boy with the raven hair hadn't noticed him on the bed or that he had left the room. Seeing his best friend again was a bittersweet experience. It was sweeter than bitter, though. Since Naruto had never seen Itachi and his mother, he was with them. Naruto had regained hope after seeing them. With his family by his side, saving Sasuke would be simpler this time. He had no intention of seeking retribution. But he scowled as a major issue came to mind. He had to get to those coordinates first, though. His doppelganger appeared more than willing to guide him in the correct direction, as he had come here to make amends. Although it appeared urgent, it was dangerous for him to travel when his training was inadequate. He knew where he was going, but what exactly would he be searching for? They would be attempting to obtain his share of the Kyuubi, according to his doppelganger. That implied that the other half of the Kyuubi had belonged to his doppelganger, correct? Or did his doppelganger just happen to know who the Kyuubi was that was sealed into? Everything was so very unclear. Here, he couldn't be certain that everything was the same. He was relieved that Sasuke had his family, but he was unsure if Itachi would attempt to murder them later. Furthermore, he was uncertain about Itachi's intention to join the Akatsuki. Additionally, he needed to locate Yondaime Mizukage, Sama and Gaara. What was his name? Naruto scowled at nothing in particular, saying, Yagura, idiot. After meeting the Mizukage, the boy Yagaru. Sama said, dude, wait. He asked the fox inside of him, which one was he again? And could see the demon rolling his eyes. The one you insulted by calling him weak and saying that he never kissed a girl. Yes, exactly. Oh, that Yagaru. Sama, you still don't remember him, do you? Naruto sighed to himself and tried to recall his exact appearance. Nope. Although Naruto didn't recall offending anyone, he was blind to many things. After his father's absence of at least a week, he pondered the purpose of the summit. All he could do was hope it wasn't another war declaration. He didn't have to spend a significant amount of the war hiding in a giant turtle because he had just arrived on this planet. He and his mother had a successful training session. The wind in his hand no longer hurt and instead felt numb after he managed to get in a few hits here and there. Additionally, his mother had taught him how to control the earth. Since controlling the earth wasn't exactly in his blood, it was much more difficult than wind. To his dismay, the only thing he could do was toss small rocks. It was progress, though, and progress was always positive. But the lunging around the estate was wearing him out, since his mother was unaware of the full scope of his fuinjutsu skills. Reading information in the library had grown boring, and practicing fuinjutsu was getting boring. He was therefore growing agitated. He wanted to try Ichiraku ramen, go out and finally see his friends, and do a lot of other things. But was unable to since nobody was aware of his existence. In order to get out tomorrow, he would pester his mother. Probably because he loved being outside and would wither away from being cooped up inside all day without any interaction with the outside world. Although he truly detested being kept a secret, he understood that it was preferable this way. Even so, he would continue to complain and gripe about it. He took a liking to his mother's leg and pleaded, please mom, I can henge or something. Please? Even though he was aware of his mother's anger, he didn't mind taking a few blows in order to train at a facility. By themselves. Alone, so he was no longer required to hold back. I swear I won't go out into the village. With a sigh, Kushina glared at Naruto. She assumed that she had instilled in her son the trait of being a persistent boy. But she didn't think she was the type to cling to people's legs like a young child who doesn't want their parents to leave for the night. He'll have a good story to tell his girlfriend about this, she pondered. Naruto's eyes flashed with the same feeling Kushina always experienced when Mikoto-san and her family visited for dinner. Naruto, I already told you no, you can't henge for the whole duration of training. She said firmly. No, Naruto smiled mischievously and knowingly at her. I'm not going to let you drain yourself out of chakra. That didn't deter Naruto, though. He tightened his grip on his mother's leg. He said in a whiny voice, but I promise not to let anyone see me. And I'll let you check in whenever you want to. Kushina sighed slightly and blinked at the final suggestion. She had a lot to do and wouldn't be able to check in for a while. After all, she was the Hokage's wife, so even though she didn't wear the hat, she still performed some of the responsibilities that went along with it. Alright, but you have to stay hanged for the entire duration of training. With a hoot, Naruto rose from the ground next to his mother's leg. Alright, let's get going, Dadbayo. A little taken aback, Kushina turned to face Naruto. He had verbally irritated her. They left prepared to face the new day after she gave a hoot as well. A boy who appeared to be around 16 years old was hanged by Naruto. It was amazing how Naruto was able to alter his attitude while wearing a henge. She observed that there was an odd aura about the boy with the red hair, pale green eyes, and no eyebrows. He would break you in two if you even glanced at him menacingly, but he would assist you if you were in danger. She pondered whether Naruto was acquainted with this boy in his alternate dimension. On the inside, Naruto laughed as people consciously moved aside to make room for him. As Gaara, he was strolling around Konoha. It was strange that he chose the Kage, but he was at a loss for a creative face. So, hopefully, he picked someone no one had met. He was obviously not going to remain Gaara for the duration of his training. All he had to do was imagine a face, along with the color of the hair, eyes, age, size, and a host of other details. They moved swiftly through the village, but Naruto savored every second. He meant a lot, and many things were different. In stores he had visited before, there were stores he had never seen before. There were some statues in locations he had never seen before that looked pretty damn old. Konoha had two enormous parks in this dimension. One was a memorial park, where he had been, and the other was an off-duty park reserved for ninjas who were spending time with their families while they were not on duty. To enter the park, you needed a hite.8. Kushina gave Naruto a wink and remarked, here we are boy. The way his mother was acting caused the boy to perspire. I will allow you to use your Minato's training field. Don't talk to strangers and don't do something stupid. She issued a warning. His mother leaned in to kiss Naruto's forehead after he nodded his head. After saying, "I love you na. I mean boy." His mother fled, leaving Naruto to make his way to the training area. Speaking quietly to himself, he said, "Training Ground 20.6. He recalls using Training Ground 13 for Team 7 a long time ago. Following the war, he primarily used it for himself. Using a different one was strange, but he never received his own. Typically, one person owned the training grounds. The students weren't old enough for their own, weren't of a high enough rank, or didn't have the money to buy one, so if that person became a sensei, they had to use their own or the open training ground to house the students. With parental approval, you had to be at least 16 to purchase one for yourself, but that was too expensive in and of itself. In order to obtain their own, students typically had to wait until they passed the Chunin exams. Although it would be modest, they could expand upon it in the future. He recalled his initial impression of Kakashi Sensei's training area. At first, Kakashi didn't trust Team 7 enough to let them see his training area. He assumed the man with the silver hair had every right to do so. Then he recalled the time he spent training for wind efficiency. It was completely different from the first one he visited, and even though he wasn't particularly aware of it, he wished he had. For the sole purpose of adding a waterfall to his training area, Kakashi saved a great deal of money. The thought of all the money being removed from his frog wallet was unthinkable to him. He winced at the mere thought. Naruto changed into a more credible person as he arrived at the entrance. Gaara was real, but he didn't think anyone would take him seriously if he claimed to be from Konoha. In order to form into the boy he had seen in many of his visions, he did the most basic thought. He was aware that he shouldn't have, but that boy was the epitome of what a Konoha person should be. "Oh, really? How about I sit beside you? We can talk about Sakura-chan." Naturally, Naruto didn't think anyone would notice him because he was dense. "Aiko, what are you doing here?" Naruto looked at the boy who was now coming toward him. Calmly, he said, "Kiba." The dog. Boy grinned like a wolf. "Ah, so you're training up too. Did you hear about the academy too?" Naruto felt like palming his face. The entire Gaara act should have been maintained. With hesitation, he answered, yeah. What had happened to the academy? He wondered. He sincerely hoped it was nothing negative. Without really noticing Naruto's bewildered expression, Kiba said, "We'll train hard and show Uruka Sensei what we've got. Do you want to join the rest of gang?" I think it'd be best if... Aiko-san. He was interrupted by a deep monotone voice. He had such a deep voice even as a young child. Naruto gave the boy a somewhat reluctant glance. He was aware that he had also made fun of the boy for being so forgettable due to his formality and the way he appeared to blur into the background. But it was good to see him again. It was good to see them both again, and Naruto grinned broadly at the boy, knowing that he was beginning anew. Shino. Inoichi entered his office with a sigh. He was having a week that he truly couldn't believe. Although not as much as before, it was still snowing, and Ino had a fairly severe fever as a result of staying outside in the snow when he had warned her not to. She was undoubtedly approaching the age at which she would be defiant. He had heard terrifying tales about those times, and although he didn't think it would ever happen when Ino was younger, he wasn't so sure now. Inoichi pondered the strange incident that occurred just 2 weeks ago while perusing the papers in his desk chair. Naruto, the blonde, showed up. He had vowed never to discuss Naruto with anyone, not even Ibiki and Shizun. But he was curious about the Hokage's intentions. He knew Minato was aware that the blonde Naruto was undoubtedly his son. All he could think about was whether Minato would send Naruto back to the academy to see all of his friends. He was aware that all of his friends, including Ino, missed Naruto. His slight alteration in appearance did not prove that he was not Naruto. He sighed as he searched his desk for a project, perhaps the most recent of the many shady snakes they had discovered in the memorial park. That had been a terrible issue, but he questioned whether it was a sick joke. Only a few months had passed since Orochimaru-san went missing when someone did something heinous. He shuddered. He was aware that many people thought the Snake Sannin had some strange scheme to destroy Konoha, but they had no basis for spreading such rumors because there was no evidence. Furthermore, since there was no sign of the Sannin, he was essentially dead. Inoichi picked up a brown package and scowled as he looked through his papers. Nobody had mentioned that they had given him a package, as far as he could recall. He glanced over it silently and noticed that the box said, "For your fox." The sender was absent. He took out a plastic bag after carefully opening the box. A hite.8 and some kind of robe were inside the plastic bag. A very worn out looking pouch was included with the plastic bag. When he opened it, small papers with seals on them and 2 sealed 3. Prong Kuniya emerged. Inoichi was taken aback. The Ondaime. Sama was the only known person in Konoha to possess a 3-prong kunai. Both the seals and the kunai were reinserted into the pouch by him. After that, he packed everything into the box. He thought the person who sent the box intended to give it to Minato. He had to deliver the package to Hokage, Sama. As Shino and Kiba made their way to an entirely new training area, Naruto looked at them with mild bewilderment. Since the academy had been closed for snow days, he was aware that Kiba and Shino were preparing for it. They were getting together with other people as well. He might be able to train at a high level and see the rest of the gang. But not as high as he was right now, which slightly infuriated him. "I'll train you later, Kit. Now you have to figure out what's going with all your friends." The two boys went into a training area, Naruto trailing behind them. The enormity of it nearly caused Naruto to gape. This place had to be hooked up by someone who was really wealthy. Or an awesome ninja who constructed the place using their awesomeness alone. 2 entire academy classes could practice there without fear of someone seeing all of their weapons because there was enough room. Which was quite a bit. Though Naruto couldn't identify what it was, a giant waterfall, perhaps, it lacked something that would have made it truly amazing, and he didn't mind. "Hey, you brought Aiko with you?" When Naruto saw the green eyes and pink hair staring at him with a slight smile, a knot formed in his throat. Uncertain of how Aiko would actually greet Sakura-chan, he waved to the girl. He had seen the boy only a few times. He was relieved that Sakura hadn't changed at all because he truly missed her. He remembered that her hair used to be fairly long, but now it was at her shoulders, and it was even shorter than when she had cut it. Sakura waved back shyly, but she appeared a little unsure. "Oh, I am all too familiar with that move." Naruto smirked in his mind as he spoke. "Yep," Kiba exclaimed, and Naruto noticed that Kiba was missing his dog. "Where's Akamaru?" inquired Naruto. Kiba folded his arms across his chest and gave a little whine. "He's with Hana so he could get treated." Naruto's eyes nearly widened. "Wah, what happened?" Kiba gave Naruto a puzzled and somewhat amused glance. "I meant he's getting groomed." "Gosh, didn't I tell you this, Uchiha?" At Kiba's final statement, Naruto stopped. Uchiha. Naruto was acting like a Uchiha at the moment, which was fantastic. He didn't know how efficient this guy was. He knew how to use fire jutsu, but he didn't know if the child used any of them. Was the second efficiency of the child a windfall? He sincerely hoped so, but he wouldn't reveal his identity in such a way. He would focus on the fire and ignore the others. Naruto had demonstrated 3 efficiencies in his other dimension. Wind is his primary, lightning is his secondary, and fire is his final. However, this child might be all earth and fire, or worse, water. With a sigh, Naruto turned to face Sakura, who appeared disinterested. He asked anyone who would respond, "So when are the others coming?" "Ino should have been here 5 minutes ago. Shikamaru will be late as will Choji, and Sasuke-kun should be here any moment," dully responded Sakura. When Sakura uttered Sasuke's name, Naruto saw that her eyes had stopped glowing. He was aware that whenever anything happened in her life that involved Sasuke when they were younger, she always seemed to feel happy. However, he didn't seem to be that significant. But the girl does have a thing for this Aiko character. Naruto was aware of that. Given that Aiko was a girl's name and all, he would have been shocked if someone had mentioned that Sakura actually liked someone with that name. She was so infatuated with Sasuke that he would be shocked in any case. The silence was broken by Ino's voice. "Sorry I'm late guys, my dad practically grounded me." Setting her pouch down on a bench, she raised her gaze. "Where's Sasuke-kun?" Naruto gave a small smile. Ino appears to still be infatuated with the Teme. He waited for Ino to respond, but as soon as he realized she was speaking to him, he blushed. "Indeed, I hanged as a Uchiha." The blonde girl accepted it even though it sounded more like a question. He should be on his way." They waited a little while longer for Choji and Shikamaru to arrive. Kiba decided that Sasuke could handle it when they arrived, so they started without him. When Naruto was paired against Shino, he thought this was ideal. Although he had never engaged in combat with Shino before, he was aware that the Bug Boy, like his mother, was all about long distance. Perhaps he could use the strategy against his mother if he could somehow get close to her for a short while. Ino was opposed to Sakura, and Kiba had paired with Choji. Shikamaru lazily sat on one of the benches, content to accept the fact that he had no opponent with whom to spar. When Shikamaru announced that they could begin, Shino launched the initial attack, much to Naruto's surprise. He could have easily avoided the massive army of bugs that suddenly appeared from below, but he chose not to. Was Aiko adept at evading attacks and moving quickly? Or did he deliver some of his own blows after taking the blows? Hey guys, what am I good at when I fight? Was all he wanted to say. Am I quick and evasive, or am I more intimate? If any of you are aware of my efficiencies, please let me know. He exhaled sharply. Yes, exactly, as if that were inevitable. He leapt into the air and performed the hand signals for the well. No Uchiha technique. Possibly a little too quickly. Fireball jutsu. Shino sent another wave of bugs his way and managed to avoid the attack in time. Naruto used another fireball jutsu that burned away the bugs because he wasn't sure if he should take the hit or avoid it. He ran towards Shino and performed some simple taijutsu as soon as his feet touched the ground. He punched Shino in the chin, causing the boy to fly back a little. The boy appeared somewhat arrogant in his visions of Aiko, but he was unsure if that was how he rolled in combat. On the battlefield, he was aware that not everyone maintained the same mindset. Shino easily kicked him back while he was performing more long-range jutsu because the taijutsu seemed too simple. Naruto truly felt screwed up. He could simply slap Shino in the face with a Rasengan, end the fight, and go back to training if he so desired. He would have been able to defeat Shino if he had known Aiko's fighting style, but he was powerless, and he was really irritated by it. He therefore made the decision to avoid Shino's blows until the Team 8 member became weary. To his astonishment, the plan was successful. He could see how weak everyone was and was quick to criticize their work. That was his weakness. They would be taking the Chunin exam in 2 years, and he questioned how any of them, including himself, had managed to survive. Because, to be honest, they were awful. Naruto couldn't even count how many times Sakura and Ino's taijutsu went out of style due to their carelessness. Until they were too exhausted to continue, Kiba and Choji essentially performed the same moves over and over. 5-minute break. Choji exhaled and said. Naruto turned to face the Akamichi member, who was sitting next to Shikamaru, who was giving him a suspicious look. What a waste. When Naruto saw the Nara, a warning went off in his mind. What made Naruto so foolish? The speed at which Shikamaru would pick it up wasn't amusing. After all, he was a Nara. He most likely became aware as soon as he entered. Not wanting to raise suspicions further, Naruto laughed loudly and roughly. He hurriedly left the training area and ran as quickly as he could to the location where he was meant to be, saying, guys, thanks for the training session but I've gotta go. As Aiko's figure vanished from the hall, Shikamaru scowled. He asked his group friends, did something seem off about him to you guys? Ino scowled a little and nodded. Sakura hummed in agreement, usually he's flirting with me and Sakura like crazy. With a frown on his face, Kiba added, and he's usually bragging about how he'll beat me. Shino went on, and he usually doesn't dodge attacks. Shikamaru had witnessed all of this, but the main thing that enraged him was that the Uchiha had not performed a parody of Sasuke, as he usually did in honor of their dear friend Naruto. Before a fight, Naruto and Aiko would always make fun of Sasuke because the Ravenet was so conceited. Shikamaru let out a sigh, well whatever it is. The statement, ladies and gentlemen, be amazed, because Aiko Uchiha is here, caused Shikamaru and everyone else to blanch a little. His companion, Sasuke, rolled his eyes. His voice was apathetic as he stated, no one cares. Aiko noticed the expression on everyone's faces and pouted a little. Sakura said, but you were just here, Ino concurred. With a deep demand for an explanation, Ino asked, you just ran off Aiko, were you messing with us? Sasuke and Aiko both had a completely bewildered expression. When Sasuke set his pouch on the bench next to Ino's, the Uchiha questioned, what are you guys talking about? Shikamaru said, never mind, it's troublesome. However, his curiosity had completely grown. What had just taken place? Kushina had nearly finished distributing all of the invitations to the dinner she would be throwing in a few days. Jiraiya, Obito, and her husband would return. As a result, she had a little more time to prepare Naruto and think through her remarks. Knowing that she should share the plan with Minato, she would ask him if it was okay to employ this strategy when he returned. To be honest, she was curious about the whereabouts of Jiraiya and Obito. They should return to Konoha by tomorrow, at the latest. But 2 days ago, she did anticipate them. She genuinely questioned why they had been apart for so long. Obito glared at the old fool who was grinning his stupid, twisted smile. Obito growled at the man. Did we really have to stop at 3 towns for you to do your stupid research? Jiraiya merely hummed and nodded his head. Dry blood was visible beneath his nose. Obito wondered why a legendary and extremely strong ninja would be such a pervert. Perhaps he simply experienced a great deal of loneliness as a child. Such twisted behavior has no justification. Damn pervert. Jiraiya gave the Uchiha a fierce look. That's super pervert to you. Naruto lay on the floor, exhausted, and he huffed out a breath. In order to do it without using the fox's chakra, he had just finished attempting to alternate the Biju bomb in some way. But since he needed to switch between Biju and Sage mode to accomplish it, that was turning out to be ineffective. According to the fox, in order to perform it in Sage mode, he had to remove a small portion of his chakra each time. Although it wouldn't be as large, it would be an alternative to the Rasengan. He has only been able to perform 2 so far, but he discovered that he still had enough chakra to make clones even after performing 2 dumbed down versions of the Biju bomb. Naruto addressed his clones, saying, "All right, you guys. Since I have the chance now, I need you to find some people for me." Each of the 3 clones gave a nod. "You, find Yagura Sama and try to convince him about the Akatsuki without hinting anything about me. You, go find Gaara, and make sure to befriend him." The 2 clones said, "Okay boss," and took off running. Naruto sighed as he turned to face the final clone. He sincerely hoped this would work, but he had no idea. "Try and find Tsunade Bachan. She should be where we last found her, but since Shizun-chan isn't with her, I'm not exactly sure." The clone hesitated for a second before nodding. "What do you want me to tell her?" The clone nodded his head and fled, saying, "Try and get her to come back to Konoha, you know. At least get her to think about Konoha and if she should come back." Naruto was aware that he would need to use chakra sparingly following the training session. Thus, he would be out of training for a few days. He hissed, "This is just great," and waited for his mother to return. He wasn't prepared for the reprimand she was about to give him, and he wouldn't be able to walk by himself. The Kage's resting place, the tower, was bathed in light as the sun rose above it. The sun was shining brightly and there were no clouds in the sky, but the wind was blowing briskly. Minato awoke to the cold air filling his sleeping quarters. Minato let out a sigh of relief as an Anbu stood watch at his door, prepared for any assault. He said, "Morning Inu," from his sleeping bag. The Anbu nodded curtly. "Good morning Hokage Sama." Minato waved him away as his formalities immediately took over. Minato smiled slightly and stood up, saying, "I may be Hokage, but I'm also your sensei. It's just Minato. Besides, I still haven't gotten used to it." After a long period of silence, the dog Anbu shook his head. "It is mandatory that I give you respect, and such respect demands formalities. I'm Minato Bito, Hokage Sama. Would it help if I said that I'd make you do D-rank missions? It does not affect me, with academy students." Minato could sense his student's glare even through the dog mask. He's standing with his arms at his sides, very near his weapon pouch. His legs spread apart, and he exuded a killer intent with ease. Minato would claim that the dog nin was prepared to kill him if he didn't know any better. "Fine then, Minato, sensei." When Minato saw the Anbu, she couldn't help but smile. He rolled up his sleeping bag and surveyed the space. Almost everything was bare. The wood floors had tiny holes in them. Even though the walls were made of wood, the person who made them at least had the grace to paint them. The back wall had a window that he saw had been opened by a certain dog nin. A tiny kitchen with exquisite china was present, but there was nothing to eat. The Kages stayed in modest houses after leaving the summit, but Minato thought it was ridiculous that no one lived there. He stretched and straightened his back, muttering to himself, "What a waste of space." Over the next few minutes, he hurriedly showered and changed into his clothes. Then he made his way to the top. Minato shivered in the chilly wind that surrounded them. When it was snowing, Konoha wasn't even this cold. There was total silence during the less than 5-minute walk to the large tower. The dog nin rarely spoke, and when he did, it was usually in response to someone else's statement. At times, Minato wished the dig nin behaved in these circumstances more like Obito. The silence that surrounded him was never his favorite, especially when there was such an urgent manner in front of him. Right now, his thoughts were his worst enemies. Minato gave the man, who appeared more like an advisor than a shinobi, a curt nod. "Yondaime Hokage, the meeting has not yet started. Only Yondaime Mizukage and Yondaime Reikage have appeared." The Mizukage and the Reikage sat with anxious expressions on their faces as she finished speaking. As he greeted him by standing, the Reikage said, "Hokage Sama, we have much to discuss." The Reikage's actions were followed by the Mizukage, but his attitude was very different from the day before. He appeared to have been up all night because his eyes were bloodshot. He never looked Minato in the eye as his gaze strayed. Every village had a grievance against the others, and they had been arguing intermittently for at least 3 days. Since Yagura Sama had brought up the most important issue for them, but no one was listening, Minato didn't think their problems were important. Telling a wall to move before the tornado struck was like that. Completely pointless. Yagura, Minato, and A had discussed their personal issues in private, but Yagura always seemed more at ease during their conversations. However, he now appeared to have had a ghost visit him. The dog Nin stood behind Minato as he sat in his seat. The young man winced as he said, "Mizukage. Sama, are you alright?" His voice was filled with genuine concern. Yagura appeared to be struggling to accept that he genuinely cared. With a sidelong glance at the wooden horseshoe table, Yagura said, "Yes, Hokage. Sama. It was just a rough night." His eyes remained there with a look of disdain. "However, I do suggest we meet up after the other cages have their pointless ramblings." For a long time, Minato was left wondering what had happened that night as the Mizukage sighed, but the stress remained on his face. The Tsuchikage hurried to his seat and gave each Kage a menacing, rather than empathetic, look. "Ah, Hokage, Mizukage, Reikage. I believe this will be our last day for these meetings. I hope you hear me out." At that moment, the Kage entered without a word and without showing any signs of emotion. He had only had problems with the Mizukage. The Kage would not listen, even though his son was a Jinchuriki himself. Furthermore, just because Minato agreed, Tsuchikage would still disagree. Additionally, Konohagakure and Iwagakure had never been close friends. Minato questioned, seemingly daring the other two to voice their own self-interests. "So which matter should we discuss first?" Minato detested the fact that they were only there to argue about their own self-serving ideas during the entire summit, not to listen to others. The Mizukage maintained a professional demeanor despite his extremely worn-out appearance. "I will ask once more that you please listen to my reasoning as to why you need to concern your thoughts with the Biju." He cocked his head at the Kage while holding his chin in his palm. Yagura. Sama squinted at the Tsuchikage and said, "Our villages have had too many qualms for too long. If we let our personal feelings get in the way of things, all of the people we swore to protect would be dead in a few years. So, either listen to me or make sure that war isn't declared for a few years." Because he was not prepared for that, Minato had to hold his breath. "Mizukage. Sama, I don't believe." The young Kage, with all his professionalism, raised his hand, and Minato immediately closed his mouth because he didn't like how a boy younger than him was so graceful in his actions that even raising his hand forced him to stop talking in order to reason with him because war was such a terrible threat. Dryly, he said, "Don't assume I am the one declaring war. Hey. Such threats from such a child. What evidence do you have that war might be caused by our actions?" With his eyes narrowed at the young Kage, the Kage asked icily, but Yagura didn't even bat an eye. "I'm not claiming that war will break out whether or not you choose to listen to me. Either way, war will break out." The Reikage said with a pained expression, "Mizukage, you have made your case, but I would like to see this proof too." The thought of war was now on everyone's mind. Minato's village had already been severely damaged by the Third Great Shinobi War, and he didn't want Naruto to have to endure it again. However, Naruto now raised a new question in his mind. The Kyuubi. Did this Naruto even know about the demon that had terrorized his wife and then his lost son? Did he still possess the Kyuubi? With a heavy sigh, Yagura Sama violently shook his head and said, "Only Jinchuriki who have a close connection with their Biju can." "A tight connection? You mean to tell me that you have to get close to a demon?" The Tsuchikage said, rising to his feet with a disheveled expression. "You might as well have sold your soul to the Shinigami, in my opinion." When Minato heard that line, he winced because it sounded like someone saying that to his son. What if people said things like that to his son, calling him a demon and saying that he plotted with the Shinigami himself? Minato scowled and gave the Tsuchikage a gloomy look. "You're a very sorry man, Tsuchikage." He spat without adding a proper suffix to the man's name. "Either you and the Kage will agree to help us figure what is going on, or you and Kage will be left bewildered once it happens. You have witnessed the Biju's power and the harm they have caused to your people. Don't allow your personal convictions to prevent you from seeing logic." The Tsuchikage stared at him in disbelief but remained silent. "If anything," began the Kage, who appeared to be paying attention to Minato, "I will take your suggestion into consideration. But I've been here for too long, and I have to go back to my village." He got up suddenly and left the room. The Tsuchikage said, "I too shall consider it." His eyes were sad, and he hurried away from the horseshoe table. Yagura sighed and smiled slightly at Minato after the older man had disappeared. He got up and said, "Thank you, Hokage. Sama, Reikage. Sama. If anything, shall we continue our discussion from yesterday?" Both Minato and the Reikage nodded, which was strange because they had never really gotten along, but they had one thing in common. They both had loved ones who were Jinchuriki, and they wanted to keep them safe. Naruto yawned loudly as he surveyed his room. He had been resting for the last 3 days because Biju bombs were very taxing. His chakra had recovered, but his body was extremely sore. His mother had scolded him for being so careless and had threatened to never allow him to train again without supervision. He had seen his friends, a large portion of the Konoha 12 who had been present, but he was certain that they were suspicious of him because he had fought against Shino and had not known anything about the Uchiha he had unwittingly pretended to be, though he suspected he must have been very brooding, perhaps because that was how Sasuke was. The other Uchiha he knew, aside from Itachi, were pretty much just downright mocking and asses. Itachi had been more of a mystery. He didn't really display any emotion, but he had claimed to be caring when he spoke to Sasuke about the Uchiha, and Naruto inferred from their brief interactions that he had been. At least for Sasuke. Naruto. His mother screamed and suddenly barged into his room. Her hair flew like it was possessed and her eyes glowed a dark crimson. Naruto gulped and put his hands up in defense. What did I say about the toilet seat? Yes, exactly. The toilet seat. He had never lived with anyone else except for the week he spent with Lee, which was a very strange time, and he had forgotten to put it down. However, Lee never voiced any complaints about him putting the toilet seat down. When you're done, put it down. He screamed and rubbed his head as his mother screamed and punched him hard in the head. Sorry. Because his mother was so frightening and had such a menacing aura, he bit out, his eyes starting to water a little. Well, sorry won't cut it, mister. I'm taking you shopping to make up for it, she said, her aura growing more composed. I tell you that every single day that you have to remember that. She never mentioned shopping to him before, so Naruto assumed this was prearranged. If anything, he always had his clothes tailored after he became Rokudame, and since he wasn't picky about his clothes, he would ask his tailor to make the same outfit for him. As a result, he never really went shopping, and even before that, he would only buy the same outfit, which was incredibly inexpensive, so he wouldn't have to go back, mostly because the shopkeepers didn't like him. He complained, but Mom, why must I go shopping? I already have enough clothes. Well Naruto, I'm having a dinner in a few days with some of the clan heads and I need to get you some formal wear. This new information worried Naruto, who said, but, I'm not supposed to be here. His mother tensed up a little and gave him a worried glance. What are you talking about, Naruto? Isn't there another Naruto here? And Naruto quickly recalled that he wasn't supposed to know about the redhead Naruto here. He was supposed to be totally unaware that another Naruto even lived here, let alone how he died. That's why I hanged, isn't it? Naru-chan, she began slowly, sitting on his bed so that they were at the same height. In our world, you disappeared, she said, her eyes sparkling with sadness but her lips quivering into a tiny smile. Her anger now seemed years away. I had you henge for that reason. Though he wasn't the same Naruto, her smile gradually widened and he felt like throwing up. We just want to show all those people that believed you were gone that we found you, she said. When she kissed him on the forehead, Naruto had to fight the urge to push her away. He loved his mother, but this was a different dimension he had entered, and he wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to be a different Naruto. He couldn't stop thinking about how people didn't accept him, and how all of his friends didn't want to be his friends because someone else had taken his place before he arrived. Now Naruto, his mother said abruptly with a smile, get dressed and henge now. After singing, she left his room, saying, we can't stay out too long. Naruto scowled and shut the door completely because he was so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't want to go shopping. He made the hand signals even though his body was still hurting, and a doppelganger of himself suddenly materialized in less than a second. What do you require, boss? His face was serious as he asked. I'm gonna need you to take my place for a few days, just don't do any training with Mom, and don't get into any danger. With a rather irritated expression, the clone said, so I have to go shopping. And act like I am. Look, what will it be for? Just 2 days, and you're me, so why am I even asking? The clone pouted and took clothes out of the closet, saying, yeah but still, you won't be here. Naruto rolled his eyes. He sometimes detested the fact that clones behaved exactly like him. Whatever, I'll leave a backup clone so you can go poof by tomorrow, Naruto said, grabbing a bunch of cozy clothes that would be useful for training, unwinding, and hanging quickly. He put the clothes on his body and slipped out of his room, secretly smiling when he heard his mother humming a song, which was something he wasn't used to but would treasure. Since his window was too small to leave through, he opened one of the larger ones and made his way out as stealthily as he could, knowing that Anbu was keeping watch around the estate's perimeter. Just a little time to myself, that's all I need. When Jiraiya and Obito finally reached the gates of Konohagakure, Obito couldn't help but exhale in relief. He would have left Jiraiya to do all of his research alone if they hadn't been tasked with finding Naruto in the south perimeter of Konoha, though he had been fortunate enough to avoid the man making advances on every girl he saw with boobs. "Ah, Obito. Sama, Jiraiya. Sama. It's good to see you again." Azumo and Genma waved to them, and Obito enthusiastically returned the greeting, but Jiraiya simply nodded. Jiraiya reprimanded the child, saying, "You're going to break your damn arm." Obito scowled at Jiraiya and put his hand back by his side, saying, "Why are you telling me about safety? I take it you want to be safe. Then avoid staring at girls because you might not lose as much blood that way, pervert." The Uchiha was elbowed in the ribs by Jiraiya, who made fun of the pain. "It's really pervert." Genma and Azumo, who appeared to be at odds with one another, were actually very close friends who frequently argued. They both had sweat drops on their faces. Obito abruptly became serious and said, "Well, I say we try and find Minato Sensei and see why he asked us to come back. He didn't like the idea of Naruto being out there, completely defenseless and in danger, when he could have been looking for him, so his sensei had better have had a very good reason for needing to return." Azumo shook his head and said, "No can do, Uchiha-san." Genma finished for Azumo, saying, "Hokage Sama is out at a Kage summit." "Now, really?" Jiraiya calmly remarked. "Well, that's interesting. Hokage summits were uncommon. In fact, they were typically held to declare war or to inaugurate a new Kage. Having experienced too many wars, Jiraiya fervently hoped it was the former since he couldn't bear the idea of Konoha going through that again. "Yes, but in his absence, Sandame Sama has assumed the role of Hokage." With a bored drawl, Genma remarked, "He ought to be in the tower." Obito nodded to the two shinobi and said, "Thank you," and Jiraiya immediately followed him as he started to make his way to the tower. Although the village had remained unchanged, Obito always expected it to be different. Even though he had only been gone for a month and a week and a half, he always expected a new shop to open, a shop to close, or a new set of buildings to be constructed because more and more foreigners were starting to move to their village. It wasn't strange that they were silent the entire way to the tower because they usually were when Jiraiya wasn't acting pervert and Obito wasn't acting so immature. "Hey, Obito-san." Aiko was running at an incredible speed toward him, and Sasuke was strolling with a bored expression on his face when Obito snapped his head up to see the two familiar faces that had materialized in front of him. The Uchiha didn't even consider the possibility that he ought to have stepped aside to allow the little brat to collide with Jiraiya. But Aiko ran into Obito and they both fell to the ground. Obito looked down at his clothes, which were gathering dust, and said, "Watch where you're going, brat. You ruined my favorite shirt." He let out a squeal. Without even looking at Obito, who was still on the ground, Aiko stood up and said, "What are you talking about? You have like 3 pairs of that shirt." He complained, "But this one is my favorite." He could almost hear Jiraiya reprimanding him for being so immature. "Now what do you want?" he yelled. Sasuke, who for some strange reason never liked him, appeared beside Aiko without even acknowledging him as his smile grew a little. "Have you discovered anything? You returned rather early from all the other occasions." Obito felt utterly useless and like a failure because he found nothing, but he hoped that someone else did. His face twisted into pure agony at seeing Aiko so thrilled for some news that at least stated that Naruto was out there, alive. Although the white-haired Sannin was still grinning, Jiraiya said, "No, from next to him. But I'm pretty sure someone did because we were all called back to return to Konoha. I have a good feeling that Hokage Sama wouldn't just drag us out for no reason." And that surprised Obito because, to be honest, Jiraiya was a jerk when he was younger. He would always say the worst things and tell Obito things that made him feel like he was nothing. However, Obito knew that was how Jiraiya operated, giving hope in a negative way and even going so far as to say that Obito would not amount to much if he didn't do anything and improve his grades in the academy. Obito was able to defend himself during the war because of this, as well as his sensei teachings. It was strange to see Jiraiya offer hope in a constructive way, but he assumed it made perfect sense. Naruto was his godson, so why would he want to inform one of Naruto's friends that his godson would not return home? "So nothing was found by you guys?" Even though the child's face was expressionless, Sasuke's voice was brimming with disappointment. With a broad smile, Obito replied, "No, but someone else did." He sincerely hoped that was the case, but he had no idea. Yagura, the last person left, decided to stay a little while longer to think about a few things, and his worries grew more and more as time passed. The link between all the Biju had been weird lately. He had thought that the Kyuubi had been taken, but just late last night he felt the chakra of the Kyuubi, and the strange thing was that the Biju had looked weaker. He genuinely had no idea what was going to happen or why, and all he could hope was that the other cages would take his warnings seriously. He knew that within a few years, they would be facing war, and that someone was organizing something involving all Biju that would lead to a terrible conflict. With a sigh, he rose from the horseshoe table and lowered his head, saying, "All right, Atsuki, let's go." When he received no response, Yagura became noticeably tense and turned to look behind him, but Atsuki was not there. What the? Yondaime. Mizukage, hello. I'm glad to have met you. As he darted through Konohagakure's streets, Naruto observed everyone and everything. The people seemed to double, and the tall buildings he had seen a few days before seemed to get taller. Just 3 days. Really, it was crazy. The idea that a Konohagakure that was so similar to this one, not this one, was in ruins in a different dimension was astounding. It just made him feel bad to think that his village's residents were HUD dwellers in Sunagakure's other dimension. He had departed with the conviction that he could make a difference. He thought he could start over and save his village and the fate that had befallen it, as well as many others. Instead, he found himself in a world where Sasuke's parents were still alive, the village had not been impacted by the attack, and Sasuke still had his family. If anything, the only thing that changed was everything Naruto desired, but since the Kyuubi had been taken from the other him, there was no safety in this world. And he was being haunted by the other him. His doppelganger chose to haunt his dreams and give him strange visions out of all people. Naruto made a concerted effort to ignore the guilt that accumulated within his heart. He had sworn to protect his people, and they were still suffering. And even though he had a lot more to do, he had left them, whether on purpose or accidentally. And he pondered whether his father felt the same way, abandoning him. As he stood there staring at him, he pondered whether his father felt bad about not being there for Naruto and his mother when they most needed him. He was aware that his mother was devastated by his departure. When he saw her die, he sensed it. That day, he could feel her anguish and sorrow in his own veins. And when that thought, which he had been attempting to avoid, suddenly entered his mind, he was unable to handle it any longer. His parents weren't like this. The Minato in this world, Hokage Sama, was not the same father who had sacrificed his life for Naruto. His mother had changed from trying to give him all the advice she could in a short period of time. He felt completely lost because he was in a different universe with the same people, but they were so different. You still need to help, no matter what. As Naruto entered the memorial park, he reprimanded himself. The park in his Konohagakure was different from this one. On the day of Naruto's birthday and beyond, the names of shinobi and kunoichi who were declared Kia for the Second Great Shinobi War were inscribed on a massive stone in the center of the memorial park at his Konohagakure. Rather, the stones were strewn all over here. Shodem and Nidame were among the shinobi who were identified. Their names were carved into the stones, and they had statues of their heads. It nearly had the appearance of a field trip destination for academy students. Naruto growled as well. This world seemed to be making fun of everything he had ever experienced. Only known ninja were mentioned in the memorial park. There were no names of the ninja who had selflessly sacrificed their lives for their village. Sasuke. Naruto could see that Sasuke was still resentful of something even though he had everything he had requested returned to his world. Even though it wasn't as serious as hatred, the Uchiha still possessed something that could be transformed into it. He thought the Uchiha would be alright if Sasuke had his family back. Clearly, he was mistaken. He was immediately accepted by his parents. Naruto had reason to believe the son was dead, but it appeared as though they had forgotten about him. He knew this was untrue, though, because he could still hear his mother crying at night. And he abruptly replaced someone when he arrived. He suddenly had his parents, and oh no, naturally, they had taken him in after learning he wasn't a spy. They put him in the room with their son. They handed him the clothes of their son. The photos their son had taken were promptly replaced. He seemed to be being used to cover a gap. He was aware that his mother, Kushina-san, looked out for him. However, he had not been welcomed into the same space in her heart as her son. His mother detested grass stains, so he muttered a curse under his breath as he sank down onto the freshly washed green grass. Remember, she's not your mother, she is his mom. He forced a smile on his face, biting back the bitter taste. He could at least see them. He was aware that his parents would never tell him until they truly felt that he was their son, whether or not they did. But in the interim, he would treasure the brief time he spent with them. Like butter from a pan, tears that he was unaware were there fell from his face. He was crying, but he hadn't realized it. He detested crying. He gave him plenty of space to think about other things, and he wasn't particularly good at thinking. He liked to be noisy and annoying because of this. Because of this, he threw himself into training with anyone who was willing to train after losing Konohagakure to the damn snake. During his training, he focused solely on improving rather than on his past mistakes. His butt became unbelievably wet and uncomfortable, so he shifted it on the ground and hiccuped. The rough voice inside him said, "Maybe it'd be best if you got out of here," causing him to flinch. "I hate that damn weeping. Besides, someone is coming." With haste, Naruto stood up and wiped away the tears that had fallen down his cheek. He was so caught up in his feelings and thoughts that he was unaware that his henge was starting to fall off. Therefore, he heedlessly concealed himself behind a rose bush that had fortunately had its thorns removed. He pondered absently why Kyuubi had told him to move aside, but he chose to remain silent after hearing two voices. "It's been 2 years. We can never be sure that he's still. Please don't talk about it. You know better than to doubt it. He's Hokage. Sama's son and my friend. Please don't talk like that." He had never heard either of the voices before, and he would have sulked in all his feelings and not even tried to listen if the final voice had never said, "Hokage. Sama's son." However, he took a chance to look at the two people because he was genuinely intrigued. In front of a boy stood a girl with short blue hair. Her arms were folded across her chest as though in self-defense, and her brown eyes appeared to be a little beseeching. She was dressed in a light green shirt that flopped over her capris. The color of her sandals was dark blue. Her arms shot out to pull on Aiko's, reminding Naruto of Sakura pleading with Sasuke to go on a date. "Please Aiko, if you do this there is a chance you won't come back." His nose wrinkled up. The girl received a slight smile from the boy, who he quickly recognized as the Aiko he hanged as. With diminished confidence, the girl, withdrew from Aiko and said, "I'm sorry, Chan, but I have to. All the other searchers have reported back here and I'm more than certain they found nothing." Naruto pushed himself closer to the bush as his ears perked up at the question, "Are you taking Sasuke Chan?" Aiko appeared startled, but he composed himself as all Uchihas would. "Or are you doing this alone?" Holding the bridge of his nose, he sighed. Instead of glaring at the girl like a real Uchiha, as Naruto had expected, he grinned up at her. Although it was sincere, Naruto could tell it was concealing a lot of secrets. His voice was cool and collected, but he sounded a little desperate to get his point across, just as the girl seemed desperate to keep him from finding him. Sasuke doesn't have to be the only one to want to get him back. Naruto was already experiencing the somewhat familiar sensation of being unwelcome, but then a massive wave of guilt struck him. He would probably run into some problems he couldn't escape if he allowed Aiko to go out and find him. Well, not him, but another him. It still bothered him, even though he was glad Aiko wasn't old enough to be referred to as a missing nin. He needed to stop him, but he needed to do it in a way that wasn't heartbreaking for the child. When the girl backed away from Naruto further, he noticed that she had huffed out a breath. "Whatever, it's your life. But don't think I won't tell anyone." Aiko simply grinned more, seemingly unfazed by the threat. "Thanks, May." Without saying another word, she waved him away and walked away. It was just Aiko now, and Naruto could see how quickly the boy practically collapsed to the ground and Aiko's smile vanished from his face. His gaze was fixed intently on the verdant grass. The boy's eyes began to well up with tears, which Naruto could see were beginning to fall, and soon the boy was crying. Although it wasn't loud enough to hear from where he was, his lip was trembling and his body was trembling violently. At this, Naruto couldn't help but frown. All of his friends, including those he had never met before, were devastated by his death. The thought of the day the clan heads would visit him, not him, but a different version of him that they thought was the other him, made him shudder. His red spikes were different from the other Narutos. While the other didn't have the necessary whisker marks at birth, he did. However, they were identical based on all of his visions of the other Naruto. The other Naruto overindulged in ramen as though it were his last meal. Though obviously not as much as he did. The other Naruto still annoyed the sensei at the academy. He didn't care that the other Naruto was dressed in orange as if he were a giant target pleading to be. Naturally, his mother merely smiled triumphantly, and his father had not approved of the color choice at all. They had different life experiences, but they were the same people. It did not, however, imply that Naruto could continue to live his life as that Naruto did. It simply meant that others might find it simpler to accept him. Perhaps he was able to see these people as he did, precious. He therefore made the decision to become the greatest Naruto that had ever existed. The initial plan was to simply fix everything, so he wasn't going to stay here to see his parents or his friends. Furthermore, he was uncertain as to whether there was an Akatsuki at all and what they intended to do. However, he would follow the plan, make all the necessary repairs, and improve the situation so that none of his friends would have to deal with a war. Perhaps he could return and make his own world better. Gaara joyfully gestured to his new creation and showed it to his new friend, whom he had met the day before, saying, "Naruto, here. I made the head." A blonde boy with bright blue eyes. Naruto gazed up at the Sandman in wonder. He said, "Wow, Gaara," as he gaped at it. "I wasn't even able to make a body." With a sincere laugh, Gaara knelt down and patted the sand. Naruto watched him in utter awe as he confidently said, "Here, I'll show you." Even though they had only been together for a day, Gaara already regarded him as a friend. It was unusual for someone his age to approach him and ask if he wanted to play. He had never heard of Naruto and had never seen him in person. He would naturally assume that Naruto would be well known if he wasn't a newcomer to the village. Naruto resembled the Undyme Hokage, though he wasn't sure if that was a coincidence. When he came to talk to his father, he had noticed the man in his village. Despite having cold blue eyes and spiky blonde hair, Naruto came across as friendlier than the Hokage. The Undyme Hokage had the ability to make you smile 1 minute and then beg for your forgiveness the next. The man wasn't frightening to Gaara, but he wasn't approachable. Well, but Naruto. Naruto was very friendly and approachable. He was always grinning and telling jokes that some Gaara didn't understand, but he still laughed because Naruto's laugh was so infectious. But Gaara was aware that Naruto would flee as soon as he discovered the demon inside of him. He would disappear into hiding, never to be seen by Gaara again. Because it was his first and possibly only friend, he only lived in the present. Without even touching the sand, Gaara was able to move it with ease and keep all the grains together. Since it was merely a demonstration, he then forced it to roll into a tiny ball and clenched his fist to keep it in place. The ball remained intact after he let go. And Naruto gave a clap, as he always does. Naruto asked quietly, his gaze still fixed on the ball Gaara had made, "Is that a jutsu? How'd you do it?" Gazing down at his hands, Gaara bit his lip. His father had always warned him not to tell anyone who wasn't Temari and Kankuro any important secrets. He focused on his skills and, he said, "The beast." Thus, he was unable to inform Naruto. He said, "It's a secret," while he shifted the ball to the left and right. Gaara looked up and saw Naruto nod his head. "I see," he said, pointing to the palm of his head at Gaara. "Then I'll show you one of my secrets." Wondering what was so secret about his, Gaara cocked his head to the side. "Whoa," he exhaled. In some way, Naruto was working with chakra in its unadulterated state. Gaara could sense the power it released as he twirled it around in his hands like a tiny ball, and Naruto wasn't even blinking. Then everything changed when Naruto touched the ball. The tiny blue ball of chakra shattered into tiny pieces and dispersed all over. Gaara couldn't take his eyes off the screen because he was so amazed. Naruto said abruptly, "Move." Gaara knew he was speaking to him, but his gaze was focused on the shards in the sky. Gaara swiftly moved to the side and out from under the shards. Naruto appeared somewhat strained and scowled. "I need you to make a hole." And Gaara did precisely that. He was cautious not to touch the shards as he moved the sand, including the Sandman. Naruto then combined all of the fragments into the hole. When Gaara closed the gap, Naruto's shoulders drooped a little, giving Gaara the impression that it was safe to rejoin him. However, he had no idea that Naruto was not finished, so when he stepped on the ground, he jumped out of panic. Declaring, "Gaara, don't!" Naruto leapt forward and grabbed Gaara. But before he knew it, he was falling with Naruto after a loud explosion occurred beneath his feet. The sand continued to fall on their faces even though they were suddenly in a dark place. Naruto used a fire jutsu to light a flame when they landed, and Gaara could see the worry on his face. He inquired, "Are you alright?" Gaara looked up with a frown on his face, but he nodded his head. There was a huge hole so high up that only a small amount of sunlight could see through. Had Naruto developed a jutsu strong enough to create such a large hole? Gaara began to question his assessment of his new friend. Naruto was always very dense, even though he was very friendly. Gaara questioned whether his lack of knowledge about Sunagakure culture was the reason. He was certain he was mistaken about the Undyme Hokage after witnessing the power the carbon copy of him had accomplished. The Special Ops Force had even been threatened by Gaara to stop pursuing him. Because Naruto could have handled it even if he had been an assassin, he wasn't so sure now. He was stuck with a boy he had misjudged completely, or at least not entirely. Naruto gave a little scream and pulled on Gaara's hand as he moved forward, saying, "Let's go this way." He didn't like the panicky feeling that had come to his chest, so he asked, "Wait, we're moving." However, he kept his voice from expressing it. We can't just stay there forever." Gaara frowned and withdrew his hand while glaring at Naruto. "I'd rather stay and wait." With the light in his hands flickering a little, Naruto turned to face him. "Wait for what?" "Help." Gaara was taken aback when Naruto smirked and asked, "From who?" Naruto appeared ecstatic. And he meant ecstatic. To embark on this adventure that they were unaware of, Naturally, Gaara was freaking out on the inside. On the outside, his face was emotionless. Since Gaara's father had not returned from the summit yet, no one would be aware of his disappearance. He was typically only perceived by Temari and Kankuro as a monster when he made his presence known. "Look Gaara, I know you're scared, but I'm not scared. I'll still be here, and if there are any monsters." "There aren't any monsters, then I'll just kick their asses." Temari says not to use that word, and we might even find treasure or something. How awesome would that be? Not awesome. But of course our first priority would be to find a way out, so that you aren't scared as much. "I'm not scared." It was so embarrassing that Gaara had to fight the urge to blush when Naruto turned to face her again. It was terrible that he had just displayed a figment of his emotions. When Temari and Kankuro were bothering him, he didn't even scream at them. Though they had only been together for 2 days, he had now yelled at Naruto, whom Gaara regarded as his best friend. Gaara was on the edge of losing his only friend because he yelled at him, and he was upset that he had been so open. But Naruto was grinning, and it was a very angry one that said, "Oh, you were so scared, and I got you to show your emotions after 2 days just being your friend." In a fit of rage, Gaara shoved Naruto ahead. With a bored drawl, he said, "Okay, you want to kick monster ass and find treasure? Then we will. Forget about the exit, we need to find monsters first." Naruto gave him a stoic look, but he looked at him as though he had grown a million heads. "All right then, Gaara," Naruto said, grinning broadly as the fire in his hand grew larger. "Let's go." Having no idea what they were doing, they marched into the pitch black tunnel. Perhaps Naruto knew what he was doing, Gaara thought, but the blonde was completely powerless as he stuck his tongue out and aimed the fire in several different directions. He exclaimed, "We should go this way," and proceeded to march in that direction. Gaara's expression was emotionless and stoic, but after traveling far enough, he began to feel compelled beneath the tunnel, and Naruto appeared to feel the same. Gaara strongly agreed with every instruction Naruto gave him. Something seemed to be urging them to continue, as though it were pleading with them to find something. He simply pondered what could be so unique that he would feel compelled to find it as well. They had been walking for what seemed like a very long time. As they walked, the tunnel appeared to get colder and deeper. Gaara found it unsettling because he had to remind himself every few minutes that this was a boy he hadn't known long enough to put his trust in. He had to drag the sand with them all the time, and he had to remind himself that Naruto wasn't yelling a battle cry whenever he loudly announced that they were heading in a different direction. And he had to keep his sand to himself, whether it was against him or some monster. When Naruto's fire faltered a little, he suddenly stopped in front of him and leaned down, causing Gaara to collide with him. Naruto focused solely on the tiny hole, unfazed by the contact. He looked at it for a long time. With a sudden direction, he said, "Gaara, go back." This abrupt demand startled Gaara, but he gave Naruto a chilly glare. "No." Naruto sighed as his shoulders sagged forward. Naruto didn't know what was beyond that hole, or so he believed. He could sense the power on the other side, though. Although Naruto couldn't fit through the tiny hole, it appeared that he could squeeze through it and reach the other side. He squatted down beside Naruto and said, "I can fit." The boy with the blonde hair gave him a worried look. He said, "Look Gaara, first." His eyes flickered with concern, just as the fire in his hands did. "I'm a clone." That was, to put it mildly, strange. Gaara poked him and scowled, "But clones don't. I'll pop, and as I do the real me will be informed that you're here and come and get you. But for now you have to go back." Naruto's typical immature form had vanished, and he now resembled the Undaime Hokage. With his eyes hardened but not menacing and his gaze demanding but not poisonous. A shadow clone to be exact. Even though the blonde wasn't making any threats, it was still a frightening sight to see. Gaara started to question himself. Perhaps Naruto was aware of what was happening and what was preventing them from crossing the wall. He hoped everything was alright because the pull on his stomach was frighteningly strong at the moment. However, that did not imply that he would simply go back. He wished to keep his friend from abandoning him. Naruto reached out to assist Gaara after his jutsu exploded. So he squeezed into the hole and pushed the blonde to his side. Naruto yelled, "Gaara!" from behind him. From what he'd heard before, it wasn't an angry shout. It was a bewildered yell with a hint of surprise. "Gaara!" he exclaimed once more. It sounded desperate to get him to turn around this time. Nevertheless, in spite of the cries for help, he continued to crawl down the hole and saw that it was fortunately growing larger. Gaara became concerned when the calls abruptly stopped. Then he heard someone whispering, followed by a poof. There was a long pause after that, and Gaara considered going back. He heard Naruto call out, "Gaara!" and released a breath he was unaware he had been holding in. Have you reached the other side? Not yet. All right, when you do tell me. Knowing that Naruto wouldn't see him, Gaara nodded. However, he detested shouting. To his surprise, though, Naruto didn't ask again. He had underestimated the length of the hole. Gaara would never be able to hear the blonde check up on him if it weren't for the structure of it. Gaara had to exercise caution a few times because the hole contained some extremely sharp edges. He couldn't remember how many times he'd been careless and cut his palms and legs. However, the Ichibi were able to cope with it. By the time he reached the end, the hole had grown to a size that allowed him to walk. He called out, "I'm at the end, Naruto." He immediately regretted putting his feet on the ground. Huh, great. You just stay there, okay, Gaara? I'll be there in no time. Naruto stared at all the bodies on the floor while Gaara muffled his voice. He was dizzy from the smell of flesh and blood. The fact that they were still alive, however, was the worst. They groaned and crawled in his direction. Holding his knees to his chest, he drew back up into the hole. Naruto! He exclaimed. He sighed in relief when he heard him call back to him after an intolerable period of silence. As one of the bodies reached up to seize him, he inquired, "How long do I have stay here?" The hand kept reaching out even as he stumbled backward. He heard a groan as he kicked it back. They replied, "Not long, I promise." But Gaara sensed that it wouldn't take more than a few days. Making sure he could still see the light but not the bodies, he forced himself back towards the hole. As the woman walked around him, the Yondaime Mizukage gave her a small frown. Her eyes, which were normally a bright orange, were a sickening shade of gray, and her mint green hair was cropped short to her neck. Bile rose in Yagura's throat, but he held it back. Additionally, he had to suppress the anger that seemed to well up inside of him. Behind her, a boy who couldn't have been older than him appeared with a hand clasped on the girl's shoulder, asking, "You remember this girl, don't you?" His eyes were hidden behind a black mask, but his hair was bright blue. As he moved closer, now standing beside the girl, a sickening smile appeared on his face. But it truly is a pleasure to meet the leader of the Bloody Mist. Yagura roared, "What did you do to you?" She was obviously not the you he had known. Although her mouth was slightly open, her expression was emotionless. Her eyes appeared glazed over, lifeless and gray. His question appeared to bore the man, who scowled. Yagura gave the man a fierce glare and moved to assault him. "You," the man said, and she nodded her head. "Do you not care for me? Only this, demon." Yu pinned Yagura to the horseshoe table before he could move an inch. He flailed about, clearly uncomfortable. It wasn't the best feeling, of course, with his arms tightly gripped and his head pressed against the table. He was aware that trying to dissuade her was pointless because, whoever the man was, he needed to be quite strong to take over a Jinchuriki's thoughts. "What do you want?" He spat out, and Yu pushed his head deeper into the table, presumably because he was being so disrespectful. If it was possible at all. The man with the blue hair said, "Yeah, no. You really are a brat." He crossed his arms over his chest and shook his head mockingly, saying, "I came all the way over here to give you a proposition and you automatically assume I want something. Will you hear me out?" It took Yagura a moment to think. A proposal, but there had to be a catch, particularly since Yu is. Some indication of power? Command? A sign of danger? He didn't know, but he didn't like it at all. He huffed out, "Fine." The man abruptly called Yu off of him, looking uncomfortably excited. While doing so, she remained a few inches behind him. Her eyes were staring at the back of his head, daring him to move, but he refrained. The man took a seat on the Indian-style horseshoe table. "I'll help you defeat the man plotting against the Jinchuriki and trying to take control of the Bijus." Yagura wanted to snort. With rage, he yelled, "What the hell are you doing right now?" and pointed at Yu. If the man didn't believe that he was the one scheming against the Jinchuriki, he must be mentally ill. The man with the blue hair shrugged. "I'm displaying the power they could have over 10 of the most powerful people. If I really wanted to, I could make you go ballistic and... well, you know the rest." Yagura turned a little pale. Could they seize control of any of the Jinchuriki in a single instant? His voice was frantic as he said, "But there are only 9 Jinchuriki." He sincerely hoped that no fool would attempt to make a new Biju with a new Jinchuriki or do anything else illogical. The man leaned closer to Yagura and said cheerfully, "That's where your part of the deal will come along. I need you to find me the Jinchuriki to the Kyuubi no Kitsune." With a snort, Yagura folded his arms across his chest. "I wouldn't even know where to start. And what does the Kyuubi have to do with a 10th Jinchuriki?" He was upset. "You know just as well as I do that a few days ago one of the tailed beasts suddenly went missing from the group. And all of a sudden the chakra reappears again, but this time the it is weaker, just to Kage levels, which is oh, so low for a Biju. Something happened, and I need to find the brat that holds the Kyuubi. So if you want me to stop the man that practically wants to murder all of you and use the Biju to annihilate all life as we know it, then you would agree. There was a hidden danger in that phrase and Yagura was paying close attention. Because I'll simply kill you if you don't. As the man patted his head, he gulped and nodded his head while wearing a faint frown. He grinned slightly and said, "Good." With a poof, he left, leaving Yagura with a frazzled mind and an unconscious you. Now I shall be going. He had a lot of questions, but they were all intertwined. He sighed and tried to remain calm as he looked down at you. His eyes opened and his heart began pounding frantically, and he gasped for air. Though everything was hazy, he is grateful to still be alive. He was barely hanging on now, but it seemed like his last resort worked. He muttered to himself, "I just have to get her and get out of here." They were all just beginning their adventure. He wasn't impressed, to put it plainly. You could use a body. You could swap a body. If you were skilled, no one in the shinobi world would ever know who you were. You couldn't exist if you truly wanted to. However, it wasn't that he had taken control of the body and used it to control and alter, rather, it was that he had manipulated the girl. The Jinchuriki? No, something else. His eyes were worriedly fixed on his comrade when he asked sharply, "Do you normally do things like that?" With a cunning grin, the man shook his head and let his dark hair fall into place as well. The man walked out, probably to get another body for his musings, and his simple response was, "No." Orochimaru. Sama, the boy with the gray hair mused. "What are your actual plans?" His eyes opened and his heart began pounding frantically, and he gasped for air. Even though everything was hazy, he was grateful to be alive. He was barely hanging on now, but it seemed like his last resort worked. He muttered to himself, "I just need to get her and leave. Then we can all be heroes." Naruto stood up and shifted, surveying the guards surrounding Sunagakure's entrance. He had visited Suna numerous times, but he was obviously friendly at the time and was only there to see how he could be of assistance. It felt like an attempt to enter Iwagakure now. They didn't know who he was or that he was actually friends with Gaara. Very close friends, and Naruto would never consider destroying the village that had supplied him with more assistance than he could remember. Naruto muttered, "So, what do you suggest, Kurama?" He questioned how the security had been breached by his clone. They appeared to be far more cautious. Which was strange because Sunagakure had been abducted the first time he visited. The fox moaned to himself as he came up with a clever scheme. Naruto scowled at the idea, saying, "The only way you could actually get inside would be to knock all of them out." But secretly, knocking out all those guards without triggering some kind of alarm seemed almost impossible. Naturally, maintaining secrecy and having a plan were always important. He kept a close eye on the conversation between the guards on their post as he scanned the entrance for anything else he might want to consider. Every time he visited Sunagakure, he was given entry, and it appeared that the guards were assigned to different shifts. When he should have been inside the tunnel inspecting merchants for, Ryu was in Ayami's place, and Ayami was positioned on the left perimeter rather than the front. Silently shifting on his feet, Naruto smiled. "Fox, I got an idea. But it involves some of your influence," he stated simply, "and a group of merchants." After a brief period of silence, Naruto heard the fox laugh deeply. "You are a smart bastard when it comes to this, you know that?" Before Naruto could respond, the fox added, "But you're an idiot when it comes to everything else. Now, I'm assuming you either want to wait for a bunch of merchants, which I would have no reason in complimenting you if you did, or you want to trick the guards by creating a whole bunch fake merchants that want to get in and then you sneak in." Naruto quickly made the sign for his shadow clone jutsu, his smile growing even wider. "Now switch with me, fox," he said, rapidly causing 15 more Narutos to appear. "It's like you're reading my mind." Kurama perspired inside Naruto's mindscape upon realizing that the blonde had not completed his plan in its entirety. Do you really think that all the Sunagakure guards would be stupid enough to believe that the same blonde wants to just sell stuff in their market? Not to mention 15 10-year-old blondes? At the statement, Naruto blinked and immediately drooped his shoulders. "Sorry, forgot about that part. I must be too excited." "Yeah, too excited. That's what it is." For the dinner, Kushina had everything prepared and arranged. She would have everything she needed if only Minato and Kakashi showed up. She needed the dinner ingredients, too. She wanted to make them fresh, so she hadn't gotten them before. Currently, though, she was out and about with her son, who was posing as a ninja and escorting her. Naruto inquired, "So, what do you need for the dinner?" As they passed several markets, she glanced over her shoulder. The boy had long brown hair and was hanged like a man. He had long, thick, black eyelashes and gorgeous brown eyes. Had Kushina not questioned Naruto, she would have assumed the boy was a girl. "Ah, just some cucumbers, tuna, Mayo, carrots and scallion. Oh, and some seaweed. She laughed. But the boy's face was contorted with wrinkles, and he appeared disgusted. She gave the boy the look and scowled at him. He was to avoid making any faces that questioned, disrespected, or revolted against anything Kushina liked, according to the look. Additionally, she enjoyed maki. Sushi. You've never tried it before, have you? Naruto scratched the back of his head and scowled. Never tried what before? She said, as if it were clear, maki, sushi. It's delicious, trust me. But Naruto didn't seem quite ready to put his trust in her. He just nodded and gave her a hesitant smile. He said, I will definitely try it. Good, now let's go to the vegetable market. Naruto shuddered at the mere mention of vegetables. Furthermore, Naruto, the clone, had actually chastised himself. He was meant to be the fierce Haku. Haku would not flinch at the sight of some vegetables. As they proceeded, he put on a brave front. The cucumbers and carrots had gone to Kushina. She managed to obtain the seaweed as well. Naruto, the clone, found it fascinating how many people admired his mother. She wasn't a bad person, but she had once been the Kyuubi.no Kitsune. But they were happy to give her smiles and have a nice day. Greetings. The people she came into contact with thought her mother was a saint. Kushina was about to leave one store when a woman stopped them. Ah, Kushina. Sama. It's nice to see you. What brings you to the markets? Naruto turned to face the female. Examining her hands first, they were fastened to the hands of another girl. The girl's pale eyes gazed in awe at Naruto and Kushina, while her long brown hair cascaded to her shoulder. After giving her a gentle smile, something Haku would undoubtedly do, Naruto turned to face the woman. When he saw her long, midnight, blue hair tied up in a traditional style with kazanshi in it, his breath caught in his throat a little. The kazanshi and her kimono, which had a pink stash and a design with all leaves, matched in color, making it incredibly elegant. She also had pink kazanshi. Her lashes were thick and a striking shade of black, which further accentuated the lavender paleness of her eyes. Her cheeks were a lovely shade of tree blossom, and her lips were plump and pink. He was certain that he was staring at Hinata's mother. Kushina exclaimed, "Ah, Harumi," with a radiant smile. "I haven't seen you in a while. I'm guessing you were out making negotiations? I bet you rocked it?" Naruto observed the woman's obvious flush. She glanced down at her daughter. "Ah, yes. Thank you, Kushina, Sama." Kushina laughed joyfully, clearly unaware of Harumi's shyness. "Well, what can I say? You are the best negotiator in Konohagakure." With a little fidgeting, Harumi remarked, "Hokage. Sama is a great negotiator himself." Naruto was mildly amused as he observed the fight. He pondered whether this was how Naruto's compliments to Hinata appeared. Though she swiftly shifted the subject, his mother was not as unaware as his father. "Oh, I am having everyone over for a clan dinner. Did Hiyashi inform you?" Harumi's eyes were full of kindness and resolve as she said, "Yes, I would be more than willing to help out in any way that I can." But Kushina dismissed her with a wave. "No way. I can't have my guest doing silly work I could do myself. Of course with Minato's help." The lavender-eyed woman looked down at the young child that Naruto, the clone, knew to be Hanabi, and said, "Well, if there is anything you need, don't hesitate to ask." The girl instantly grinned up at the two when Harumi whispered something in her ear. "I'm Hanabi and I'm 4, I'll be 5 next year," she said with pride, her teeth gaping wide as she grinned broadly. Naruto, the clone, grinned down at her. He exclaimed joyfully, "Really? My birthday is coming up soon." Hanabi gave him a wide-eyed stare. With such pride, Hanabi said, "My sister's birthday is coming up soon too." Naruto had to bite his lip a little. When they are young, they are adorable, but as they get older, they become brats. In fact, I can't imagine Konohamaru being anything other than a brat. Harumi said, "Ah yes, Hinata's anniversary is coming up soon." Naruto couldn't help but notice the melancholy smile that appeared on the Hyuga's lips. For an instant, he glanced at his mother and saw the guilt shining so brightly on her face. The clone could only speculate as to what transpired. She bowed to them both and then pulled Hanabi's hand as they left the store. "I should get going, Kushina. Sama. Please tell Hokage. Sama I said hello when he returns from his trip." Naruto asked his mother a question as soon as they left. Why did she call Hinata's birthday her anniversary? Kushina's guilt seemed to show even more when she looked at him. "Naruto, I got my child back. Harumi's child is gone forever," she said in a low voice. The moon was half split, it was dark outside, and there were no stars that day. While the rest of his classmates complained about how dark it was, Naruto was pleased to see the midnight blue sky and watched with mild amusement. His friends abruptly fell silent as he declared, "I'm gonna do it." They were used to the boy being so adamant about everything, but they weren't sure what he was attempting to accomplish this particular evening. He stretched and stood up, looking down at his friends who were lying on their backs and gazing up at the stars. Their parents were talking among themselves not too far away. He glanced at his friends and then back at his family. "I'm gonna need your guys' help though." The first to agree to it was Ino. She would much rather do something than gaze at the sky because she detested sitting around doing nothing. She got up and pulled Sakura up with her, saying, "All right, we'll do it." Sakura shook her head and blushed a little. She said, "But what are we doing?" to one of her blue-eyed pals. Ino glanced at Naruto and assumed she ought to have inquired as well. She was simply bored, though. Snatching at his hair with long grass strands in it, Sasuke said, "Yeah, Naruto. What exactly do you want us to help you with?" He sat up and frowned slightly at the boy. He glared at his friend and said, "If it's painting the Hokage monument again, then I want no part. My dad practically had me clean every room in the estate." Naruto looked at all of his friends with a smile on his face. "If any of you aren't in, then you can just leave. I don't want anyone messing up my super awesome plans of becoming an awesome hero." Shikamaru looked up at the noisy redhead, and this caused him to open one eye languidly. He muttered to himself, "Super awesome plan to become a hero. Sounds troublesome." However, his friends all knew that he was not going anywhere anytime soon. Chips in hand, Choji questioned, "Will we be looked at as heroes?" Choji was the kind of person who preferred to avoid trouble for as long as possible, but he was always willing to follow along if it would greatly benefit him. At the end, there was a silent, "Duh," but it was all in good fun. "Of course. Why would I ask if you guys didn't get any credit?" His friends were aware that, good or bad, he enjoyed giving credit equally. Choji merely grinned slightly and nodded. Then he sputtered, "I'm in." Kiba sat up and began, "Of course, if it means us being heroes." Something that seemed like hope sparkled in his eyes. "Then me and Akamaru are in." Naruto gave the would-be dog ninja a smile. The last person still lying on the ground was asked by Naruto, "All right, how about you, Aiko?" Shikamaru was actually lying on the ground as well, but he had already consented. Naruto's perspiration fell and a gentle snore was heard. Naruto picked up his foot and kicked the boy in the side, causing him to roll down the hillside. Aiko marched back up the hill, shouting, "What the heck was that for?" His brow was furrowed in a fierce line, but his eyes were drooping. When the Uchiha eventually reached the top and took a seat next to Kiba, Naruto laughed to himself. He shrugged and said, "I asked you a question." Aiko gave him a somewhat incredulous look before turning to face Sakura and Ino, who were giggling at him. Shikamaru scowled. Sasuke merely smirked, and Kiba was laughing. Sasuke said, "Naruto wants to make us heroes. Are you in?" They all stood up, and Aiko grinned and said, "Huh, of course I'm in. What type of question is that? So how do we become heroes?" he inquired, his weary exterior rapidly disappearing. Naruto looked up at the sky with a broad smile and shifted on the ground. "Well, let's just say it involves the tale of Konoha's Hyuga princess." Shikamaru gazed up at the stars while lying in the grass. He had been unclear about the specifics of the news that the Hokage had returned. A Hokage's failure to promptly announce the events at a summit was never good. All he wanted was to avoid experiencing war the way his father had. It appeared to be problematic. "You remember when we lay here 2 years ago?" Ino replied. She spoke in a low voice with a hint of melancholy. Shikamaru did recall it vividly, as though it had happened yesterday. Shikamaru could hear that the boy was already becoming emotional as Choji remarked, "I remember he told us we all were gonna be heroes. If only we didn't." "If only we didn't nothing." Kiba cried out abruptly as she sat up. He nodded his head and remarked, "Naruto wouldn't want us to blame ourselves." Sakura turned to her side and looked widely at the stars, saying, "Doesn't mean we can't blame ourselves." As she stood up, Ino exclaimed, "Seriously, are we sulking right now? Look, I'm sorry for bringing the whole thing up to begin with. Besides, it's his anniversary soon. What are we going to do for this anniversary?" she inquired. Her face was covered in her blonde hair. "Isn't Kushina, Sama and Hokage Sama inviting all the clan heads for a dinner on his birthday?" Shino responded. Shikamaru nearly lost awareness of his presence. "Yeah, Jiraiya. Sama says it has something to do with Hokage. Sama coming back," Aiko said. From her lying position on the grass, Sakura exclaimed, "Wait, Jiraiya. Sama came back? When?" Aiko shrugged and said, "Huh? A few days ago." Sasuke kept a close eye on his cousin. The fact that the enthusiastic Uchiha wasn't, well, enthusiastic was really getting on Sasuke's nerves. He never spoke as much as he used to, and his smile now seemed forced. Sasuke was really annoyed by it. His question was direct. What are you planning? He looked for anything in Aiko's eyes. Aiko gave him a stern look and shrugged. Aiko said quietly, excluding the others from his conversation, I don't think they found anything, Sasuke. Sasuke gave his cousin a stern look. He immediately regretted asking, as a sly and desperate grin appeared on Aiko's lips. It's all we got left, Aiko. What exactly will you do if it turns up as nothing? He said. He said plainly, do what we've been told never to do as Uchiha. With genuine curiosity, Sasuke inquired, and what would that be? Even though he was unaware of the Uchiha's greatest secret, his father had always warned him not to divulge it. Don't do drastic things based on your emotions. As the boy was drawn into the lively discussion between Sakura and Ino about what Jiraiya, Sama and Obito, Sama must have discovered, Sasuke scowled and gave his cousin a close look. Sasuke observed the boy playing along, grinning broadly and nodding his agreement with certain suggestions. If nothing appears, what precisely do you intend to do, Aiko? Naruto grinned broadly at every clone he had created. Before long, he insisted that they henge into someone else, ideally a marketer. And they all did, with their own item to sell. Naturally, the object was a leaf or twig that had been manipulated to appear to be something else. His chest grew swelled with pride. Even though he was a Hokage, he still occasionally had childish ideas about pulling practical jokes. This is the ultimate practical joke, but there was a good reason for it. Why not accomplish two goals at once? Caught by the sea, Naruto held up a net of fish. Although he was certain that using explosive tags to capture fish was against the law, he did it for a worthy cause. He only needed Kuruma to switch with him now, and they would be marching up to Sunagakure's gates, but the fox was very reluctant. I have a bad feeling about this whole thing, kid, the fox complained, which caught Naruto off guard. Something gave the fox a bad feeling. What prompted that? As Naruto experimented with various henges to determine which would function best, he asked, What bad feeling are you having? He chose a man who was muscular and had a mustache, but Naruto needed to come up with someone he knew who genuinely had those features. Arrow. Sennin was the best he could get, and he changed him slightly after that. Then he rehearsed his erotic grin. It seemed necessary for some reason. I haven't felt this feeling since the day your father sealed me inside you. So take it as a warning. I have no idea what it is, but it is familiar, almost like it's... Naruto shivered after grinning broadly and menacingly into the river. It was flawless. He gathered the clones for their entrance and asked, what is it like? Naruto became a little concerned when the fox hesitated to respond. The fox withdrew after saying, it couldn't possibly be true, so do not worry. Well, it won't change the fact that you will have to talk to the guard. Naruto reminded him, and he heard Kurama curse him about how no human would ever tell him what to do. Naruto rolled his eyes, thinking about what he had said for a moment, wondering what could not be true, but he didn't think about it too much because they had to save Gaara, who was likely starving at this point. It's either that or have all Suna chase us because I don't have scary as hell eyes that can convince people to do whatever the hell I want. Only Kit's weak mindedness is to blame. Kurama muttered, I never had a chance to improve on it, but he still switched with the brat, saying, let's get it over with. Gaara shivered in the tiny hole, his stomach rumbling with hunger, desperate, needing food, water, and not knowing where to find it. Occasionally, he saw thin, wrinkled hands reach up as if pleading with him to come up, and he wondered if he had become like them, like they were dead but still alive, and wondered how they had managed to survive for so long without anyone coming to feed or care for them, as if death simply couldn't hold them. He gazed around him with the same horror and fear, wondering how they handled it, how they could stand it, and whether they even had feelings. It was a lab, of course, but it felt more like a torture chamber, with body parts all over the place and a stench that never went away. Gaara turned to face his friend on the other side of the hole and heard him say, he's in here. Gaara nearly burst with joy when the same voice said, I see. He would finally be able to leave the hellhole, eat, and see his sister, brother, and even his father, which was uncommon. I have a way of fixing this, Naruto said excitedly, and then he heard the loud Rasengan. The hole grew larger in an instant, and whatever force he applied threw Gaara off balance as his butt skidded down the hole a little. He nearly lost his temper when a hand tried to touch him, but he remained composed when Naruto reappeared in front of him, his blue eyes first scanning him for injuries, then scanning him as though he had never seen him before. The fact that Naruto was sitting on the cement floor made him appear noticeably taller. Naruto's smile quickly changed to one of outright disgust. I know. Gaara said simply, "It stinks," and Naruto covered his nose with his free hand before holding out a plastic bag. "There's a bottle of water in there too," Naruto said, his eyes watering. "You can eat it if you can stomach it. I'll take you back up there after that." Even though he hadn't been friends with Naruto for a long time, it felt like he was best friends with him, and the blonde's suggestion that he was taking him back up there could only indicate that Naruto was planning to return right here. Gaara wanted to veto this, but he was silenced when the bag was thrust in his face, and he ate the bento quickly while Naruto grinned. "What?" Gaara swallowed a small portion of his meal before asking. "It's nice to see you again." The blonde then turned to face his clone and said, "You're going to have to pop. Well done. You've been here long enough." The clone gave a nod. Only then did Naruto really look at the lab, and his eyes widened in horror. "No problem, boss." He popped with a smile, taking the fire with him but leaving the lab's light shining brightly on them. The blonde, who must have been the Hokage's son, said simply, "Gaara, I'm going to have to ask you a favor." Gaara was still taken aback by the blonde's level of authority. "Well, after I raise you back up, I would like 15 minutes. Please give me 15 minutes to simply explore this place before I tell your dad about it." At this, Gaara scowled. "Will we cross paths again?" As his stomach quickly filled up and he started drinking the water, he asked shyly and put the bento back in the bag. Naruto smiled broadly and said, "Obviously, I would definitely see my friend again." "You wouldn't want to be my friend after you realized that I'm a monster," Gaara said with a tiny but sincere smile. "Can you promise me that?" Gaara inquired because he thought the blonde would never see him again because Naruto would never want to see him again after someone told him about him. Gaara gasped inwardly as Naruto, who seemed to read his thoughts, blinked at him before grinning sadly and said, "I know what you have inside you, Gaara. Because of this you've been friendless for a long time and you feel like no one would ever want to befriend you. You feel helpless and abandoned. How are you aware?" This time, Gaara gasped as Naruto sighed and lifted his shirt to reveal a similar but distinct seal on his stomach. "I wanted to be your friend because I understand how you feel, and you know what?" Gaara gazed up at Naruto with anticipation. "What?" "There are a whole bunch of others who want to be your friend too." The idea that more people wanted to be his friends filled Gaara's eyes with tears. "Really?" Naruto smiled back. "Yes. And you only need to disprove everyone. Prove to them that although you are a monster, you are not one. Prove to everyone that you have the strength and the heart to be the best. They will agree if you are able to accomplish that. You will be welcomed by every shinobi and every villager. They will, but it will take time." "I will," Gaara said with a forceful nod of his head. "Yes, I will." Although he appeared surprised by his enthusiasm, Naruto burst out laughing. "Now, let me get you home." Kushina was in a panic. No, she was in a panic. Evidently, Naruto had been using a clone on her the entire time, and when it finally popped, Kushina was left worried because, although she initially believed it to be a joke because her Naru-chan enjoyed pulling practical jokes, she soon realized that it was more than that. Something was amiss, and the dinner was in less than a week, and Minato was already back. As she frantically searched, she realized that she had lost their son once more, but this time she was unable to tell anyone because no one knew he had returned. She thought she was a terrible mother. What kind of mom lost her kids? She had to put on a smile as two of Konoha's best ninja approached her while she was frantically searching the streets for a blonde boy. "Oh, Obito, Jiraiya," she said. "I expected you a few days ago," hoping to divert her thoughts from her Naru-chan and all the what-if scenarios that had made her cry before she went looking for him. However, she was unable to do so. After exchanging glances, the two ninja turned back to Kushina and asked, "Are you alright, Kushina?" "Sama?" Observing her tear-stained eyes, Obito inquired. Obito and Jiraiya were alarmed by this since they had only ever witnessed Kushina cry following Naruto's disappearance, and the news of her child's death is the only thing that could possibly cause her to cry, but that would be ridiculous. Kushina ignored Obito's question and pulled them both into an embrace, saying, "Oh, I missed you too. I have a lot to tell you but it will have to wait until the dinner." Kushina's words caused both of them to relax. They both hoped it wasn't what they believed it to be. Tsunade made a concerted effort to avoid getting into fights at bars, but when you get wasted and lose a lot of money gambling, it's inevitable that a fight will break out. At least that's what it meant for Tsunade. Tsunade had been, well, bored ever since Shizun had left, accepting the job offer that Konohagakure had given her. She gambled more and got into more fights than usual, and the guys she got into fights with always had the same cliched excuses. "You're a lady, I'd never hit a woman," and so on. However, it didn't really matter to Tsunade. Whether she was a lady or not, she would still make a face if she felt like it. She knew more than anything that she would not get anywhere with her lump sum amount of money because she did suck, which is why she borrowed the large suitcase of money because she was going gambling today. But she had never been deterred by that before. She was prepared to place a wager as she entered the bar. She never had to sign in to place a wager or anything like that, and it was simple to start one of the dumb bets that were always available at bars. Looking at the guys at the bar, who appeared to be very drunk, she smugly declared, "I'm here." Suande merely grinned and said, "Let the betting commence." She set the suitcase on the bar's table and turned to face two men, saying, "You too." She smirked as the other man appeared offended and pointed to the man with the large gut and full on blonde beard, but whose head was shiny and bald. "I'm pretty sure you," she said. She used to wager at small casinos, but she was expelled from this town, so she would leave right away. Since this was her last night, she might as well enjoy herself. Well, this chubby jerk, the lean, muscled man, who did appear older than the fat one, said, "I could beat him easily." "Hey, who are you referring to as fat?" Everyone joined in on the action after that comment, and others started placing bets as well. In reality, it seemed like they all chose the skinny guys. She was not going to win this one. Suande smirked. "I say 300 Ryo on Fatso here," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder, and the men fell silent for a moment before roaring back to life. "We will become wealthy. Kenji will easily defeat him because he is so strong. There's no way he'll win. Is this woman blind or something?" It was also true that Suande could have placed her own wager since she was certain to win, but that was in no way acceptable. The fat man gave the slender old man a determined look and said, "Let's get this going." He uttered those words. Suande kept a close eye on the two men as they prepared for an arm wrestle. 3, 2, 1. Slow down, and as soon as the commotion and excitement subsided, the winner was announced with a simple thump. The obese one flashed a bright, sheepish smile. Suande could not believe her eyes as he said, laughing merrily, "I guess I won." She was accustomed to losing when she wagered money. She was used to betting lives and winning, but how could she have failed to realize that when you bet a life and add money to the mix? Stunned, she said, "Well, shit. I guess I'm about to be rich." The plump man grinned brightly as he gazed at her. Then there was a commotion all around. It was the first time. What the hell was going on, and why was that fat ass staring at her with such intentness? She actually won at gambling with money, and she started a bar fight without even having a cup of coffee. Naruto. With her hands on her hips and her head slightly lowered, Ino said, "We can't just leave Konoha." The boy was on the floor, massaging the knot on his head that the blonde girl had just given him. "Your idea is great fun, but I'm more than sure that girl would be dead," Ino said, glaring slightly. "In any case, it's just a dumb fairy tale." Aiko, a little bashful about telling the blonde boy that he thought it was just a new game he made up, said, "Yeah, Naruto. You heard what your father said about missing Nin, so you know it's dangerous to leave Konoha. And what Ino's father said about people who sell eyes." He shook his head wildly and gulped. "And it's only a fairy tale. It's not worth dying for." Soon after, the rest of his friends started talking to him about their own worries and feelings about the situation. Many of them thought it was a hoax, which made him wince. Many of them also claimed that the Hyuga princess was merely a myth, but Naruto felt differently. "Come on, guys. I'll take care of the rest. Just assist with the gates. I swear I'll be back. I never break my word." No one moved when he pleaded, rubbing the painful area on his head and turning to face each of his friends in an attempt to find someone who could assist him. "I knew this would be troublesome," Shikamaru said, letting out a sigh and settling back in the grass. "Naruto, do you realize how many people might want to kill you? Do you realize how many people might attack you for engaging in the slave trade if you were to leave the village? You have great potential and are the son of the Hokage." After saying, "They might exploit your potential or they might just kill so that you never reach your potential," everyone nodded, and Naruto fell silent. He knew that Shikamaru was right, but he still felt compelled to leave because he couldn't ignore the urge, especially since his friends thought his life was in danger. He shrugged, scratching the back of his head sheepishly, and said, "I guess we can make up a game." He would never lie to his friends, so he would never tell them that he was simply going to put the mission on hold for a while rather than disregard their warnings. "What are the rules?" he asked. Everyone scowled at this since they knew their friend well enough to know that he still wanted to go and find a girl they had only heard about at festivals. She was a girl who was abducted for her eyes when she was 3 years old, and when her family got her back, all they got was her body with deep black holes for eyes. Her family grieved, and it is said that she haunts the Hyuga Manor, but no one really knows. They don't know if there was another heir who wasn't Hanabi, and they don't know if Harumi Sama had another daughter because the Hyugas never discussed it. It was life or death out there, and Naruto could not survive without bodyguards. Sasuke rolled his eyes and glared daggers at his best friend, knowing that his intimidating Naruto would not accomplish much, but he wanted Todobi to get it through his thick skull that it wasn't at all like chasing after Tora when the genin paid them or even playing their pretend games. Because Shikamaru was simply too lazy, Sakura came up with the rules for the game, which were similar to hide and seek, except that Aiko would be the one trying to get the Hyuga princess's eyes. The Uchiha boy scowled and moaned at receiving such a title, and Sakura laughed at his antics. "I promise you can save everyone next," she said, and he perked up. The rules were straightforward. Only Aiko and Choji were permitted to use their hands. Everyone else had to keep their hands behind their backs. If Aiko touched one of your hands, you had to cover one eye. If he touched both, you had to assist him in getting the others. Choji could only save you if you had one eye or both eyes. If you had one eye, Choji had to save you twice, and once he did, you had to assist him. Choji was the one who had prevented everyone from having their eyes taken. Playing their new game was enjoyable. Aiko had gotten Ino, who later struck him in the head, Sasuke, and Shikamaru because the boy was simply too lazy, leaving Choji to save Naruto and Sakura because Shino was so quiet and cunning that he had forgotten the boy was hiding beneath the slide. After that, Aiko became the savior and Naruto the eye taker. That was the best round because Aiko and Naruto continued to compete fiercely, and when Naruto took one eye, Aiko would save it, leaving the person to be saved or not. Sasuke was the first person Naruto got, but Aiko had already gotten Sakura, and it took a long time for one of them to get Shikamaru surprisingly. After saving Shikamaru, he told the Uchiha that a certain person was still sitting beneath the slide, so Aiko also saved Shino, but in the process, Naruto had already gotten Choji, leaving only one more person. Ino. The girl was very good at hiding, but with the help of Sasuke and Choji, as well as the extra time from Aiko's search for Shino in the dark, Naruto had located her and only took one of her eyes. When Aiko discovered that she had given back her eye, she immediately begged him to save her, but Naruto was unyielding and he pounced on the Uchiha, holding him back, then instructed his two minions to take both of Ino's eyes. Needless to say that this was cheating, but Aiko said it was dishonest. Aiko reluctantly consented, and they kept playing until everyone had to leave for their homes. Only Naruto, Aiko, and Sasuke remained at the end, and they declared the blonde's deathbed because they knew he still harbored dreams of becoming a Hyuga princess. Naruto dismissed it with a laugh. The following evening was late, and Kushina was still looking for her son, Minato. As she arrived at the estate, she called out. Her husband was in the kitchen preparing their favorite dish, ramen, which he rarely did by himself. The blonde was grinning, delighted that he could surprise his wife and son because he had left work early. His wife was breathing heavily, her hair was a tangled mess, her eyes were burning with tears, and she was shaking and muttering things about Naruto. He glanced over his shoulder and gave her a bright smile, but he saw right away that she was in distress and hurried over to her side. What is it, Kushina? What happened? Naruto, where are you? After asking her to sit down, he went to check on his son behind her but he wasn't there. His wife hurried back up as soon as she had sat down, saying, We must locate him, Minato. In a panic, she said, We have to find him. He said, as quietly as possible, Calm down, Kushina. His wife complied right away, but she continued to shake violently. Now explain to me what happened. I was driving him home from the park. He followed me into a store after I entered. It was a tiny confectionery. However, Minato was gone as soon as I turned to check if he had gotten anything. I had no idea where he went in the blink of an eye. She started crying. I thought it was some kind of prank, so I pretended to be worried, and the salesman pretended too, but when he never showed up in front of me, I knew something was wrong, so I went searching and I couldn't find him. Minato. Suppressing his feelings, Minato cast a grim glance over his wife and said, I'll call the Anbu to begin a search, and then we'll go searching in a little while. Okay. His wife nodded and wiped away her tears when he asked her gently. Naruto's friends were stunned and unable to speak after that day. They wondered how he managed to get past the gates and why their warning wasn't sufficient, and they believed that someone would have stopped him or seen him and warned him not to. When Sasuke arrived at the Hokage tower with his older brother Itachi and cousin Aiko, he shifted uncomfortably. The Hokage gave the three of them a grim smile and said, Have a seat. His voice was croaky, but he looked much older, with bags under his eyes. They didn't remember this Hokage. At that point, Sasuke broke down and related the entire tale, with Aiko interjecting occasionally. Sasuke replied honestly, with tears streaming down his cheeks, We didn't think he'd get past the gates. The Hokage still grinned grimly at them in spite of the admission. "Don't worry, Sasuke and Aiko, we'll locate him, I swear." After that day, several ninja volunteered to help find Naruto in their free time. Obito and Jiraiya were the main searchers, and they discovered a few hints about his location. He was near a village and did not travel far. But that was all they knew about Naruto's actual travel distance. Someone could have moved him somewhere else. The first year was the most difficult. The academy was still adjusting. Kiba and Aiko continued to beat each other viciously or at others whenever they could, earning them detentions and suspensions. Sasuke became aloof and silent, concentrating only on his studies and never smiling. He went home promptly and worked diligently, practicing his jutsu repeatedly in an attempt to perfect it. Sakura and Ino started fighting more. They never discussed it openly, but anyone else would know that their arguments were about adjusting to Naruto. Shikamaru and Choji appeared to be the least affected, but in fact, they spent a lot of time together, never discussing Naruto, instead choosing to spend their time staring at the clouds. For the entire year, Shino trained and worked from home instead of going to school, and occasionally his mother could hear him crying. They had previously fallen apart, but Naruto helped them come together during the second year. For the first time in a whole year, Aiko and Sakura sat down and discussed their feelings, including why they were angry and what they felt they should have done. Needless to say, there were many tears and arguments, and they all still harbor anger, but it seemed to be more focused on the fact that Naruto was gone than on the fact that they were the reason he was gone, or at least that's what they believed. Kushina blamed herself a lot, but she kept that to herself and tried not to think too much about it. The Hokage got back on his feet, the bags under his eyes quickly disappeared, and he went to work a lot more. Naturally, when he got home, he cuddled with his wife and they spent many silent nights just looking through pictures of their baby boy. Whether they thought it wouldn't get that far or they thought they allowed it to get that far, it's safe to say that everyone blamed themselves for various reasons. They all blamed something that was entirely out of their control, but they never stopped to consider who else was a major factor in the entire situation. They are princesses of Hyuga. The girl put on a stoic face as she positioned herself, her eyes never leaving the other girl's vital points. This would be the last test she would take, and after it was over, she would be free to return to wherever she thought she came from. She didn't remember much of her early years. She only remembered growing up and learning the Juken, having been forced to learn how to use her Byakugan and remember pressure points, which she had mastered at the age of 8, and now she was learning how to use the Juken technique without her Byakugan. The man named Kabuto had wrapped her eyes with medical tape, and she assumed Kabuto had done the same to her opponents. She had been practicing for almost 2 years, and now was the last test. Her opponent was a Sharingan user, which seemed all too strange because their eyes were their greatest advantage, but they were being told to fight blind. Who gets the go? Ahead to continue living. She scowled as she pumped chakra into her ears to hear her opponent's precise location. She could hear them circling her, and she knew right away what was happening. There was no blindfold on the Sharingan user's eyes. This was just a test for her. She thought, airborne, but instead of tilting her head up, she merely tilted to the side and dodged as soon as she heard, fireball jutsu. Her frown deepened as the Sharingan user's feet abruptly left the ground. She immediately reverted to her Juken form and shunned the flames, motivated by the heat from the flames. She devised her attack plan as soon as she heard those feet hit the ground. She refused to let the fact that this was a taijutsu test deter her from using some kind of element. Using the right hand signs, she swiftly filled the arena with water while whispering her jutsu under her lips. By doing this, she would be able to improve her hearing without wasting chakra listening. She would only need to hear the water splashes. The girl, however, appeared to be unaware of this. "Ha, I missed it." Hinata had to restrain herself from rolling her eyes as the girl hurried her, assuming that her covered eyes were weakness. How conceited. Were all Sharingan users like this? The girl suddenly threw punches in front of her, the first striking her stomach, but Hinata was quick enough to catch it and knock the girl to the ground, where she swiftly used all the water that was accumulating around her to her advantage. As Hinata performed her jutsu, the water swiftly turned into spikes, and her deft and quick hands created spikes that were long enough to lock the girl in a cage. "This is your best option. So useless without your eyes," the Sharingan user muttered. Without using her eyes, Hinata quickly shunshined behind the girl, saying, "You're too loud, and talk too much." Before long, the girl was caught in a circle of attacks as she was struck by Hinata's slightly altered Juken style, which she amplified because she knew some pressure points would be missed. It escalated until it reached 60. 4 hits became 16, 16 into 30.2, and so on. Despite her quiet demeanor, Hinata was far more lethal. She felt bad, not terrible, for having to do this to the girl, but survival was more important. She scowled as the Sharingan user tensed up and then went limp, plunging into the watery flood. These matches hardly ever lasted more than a few minutes, but this one was faster than the others, so she must be new. Hinata was startled by the single loud clap that filled the room. Well done. As Hinata watched the gray-haired teenager smile at her, she said, "You can take off the medical tape. You've come a long way. More than your peers, actually. Get your belongings ready. You will be relocated so that Orochimaru-sama can observe your development." The gray-haired teenager then departed, leaving Hinata and the unconscious Sharingan user. The girl, who was no older than 7, had short hair that fell unevenly on her shoulders, and Hinata stared at her face for a long time until the entire arena had been cleared. She wondered how Kabuto-san was able to have such children, but she wasn't sure she really wanted to know. With a sigh, she lifted the young girl, and as she struggled for a moment, the girl's arms flung around her neck, and Hinata was startled to feel the girl's face jam into her neck. She wished she could stay and help the girl, but it was inevitable. It was time for her to be selfish, but she had to be at least 6 years old. A young girl should have a mother figure of some kind. As she left the arena, Hinata scowled. She would figure it all out, but for the time being, she needed to heal the young girl quickly. Kabuto kept all kinds of medical equipment in his lab, and she had even learned a few medical jutsu. She practiced constantly, and the gray-haired teen had let her. He seemed more than happy that she was interested in learning, so he would be happy if she used all that practice, right? She furrowed her brow in exasperation, recalling that just 2 months prior, her closet friend, could she use that word, had been given the chance to advance in status, and he seemed determined to take her with him. She couldn't simply refuse to return the favor, since he had made an effort to help her. She ought to try for someone else, at the very least, and why not a young girl in need of her assistance? What was wrong with that? "I'll do everything in my power to get you out," Hinata whispered, smiling softly into the crowd of dark hair. "It's the least I can do." With a slight sense of hope rising inside her, she picked up her pace and left the arena, determined to at least try with all her strength to escape the cave in which she had spent her entire life and perhaps even help someone else in the process. It was really difficult to watch his little brother suffer. He watched with tired eyes as Sasuke looked through the small flower shop owned by Ino's family, trying to decide which flowers to put up for Naruto's anniversary. It was sort of customary for one to celebrate the day of their birth rather than the day of death because in many shinobi's villages, death was not always honorable. In just 3 days, Naruto's birthday was approaching, so Sasuke and his friends looked at flowers, and each of them chose a flower that best reflected Naruto. Itachi was asked to be included, which broke his heart, mainly because he had the biggest secret hidden behind his heart. They were picking flowers for Naruto, who was still alive. He scowled as he picked up a marigold, a simple orange and yellow flower that described itself as herb of the sun, and in every way represented Naruto. "That's a nice choice," the blonde, who he thought was Ino, said, pointing to the flower. "It suits Naruto well and is the flower for his month. October. I think it would do well. Just let me take the tag," he said, nodding without knowing that information. It appeared that he had chosen something significant. "No fee." With a faint smile, she picked up the scissors and cut the tag off. He returned her smile and thanked her, but as soon as she left, it faltered and he felt the need to simply leave the store. He should not allow his emotions to run amok. He scowled at the marigold, realizing that he would have to speak with Kushina-sama because the secret was too heavy for him. It was difficult just to get past doors at this point, and Naruto could not fall at this point. Kurama was not responding when he spoke, and he had a bad inkling that it had something to do with a certain redhead. This was primarily due to the way the hideout was shaped, with similar carvings on the wall and the eerie feelings that were creeping on him. Naruto pushed himself to go further in the hideout, though, because he needed to find something, some kind of clue to help him formulate a bigger and better plan to figure out what this world has in store for him. Sweat trickled down his face as he leaned against the wall and tried to continue, wondering what the hell was holding him up and what the hell was wrong with his body. He was discovering more and more of Orochimaru's strange and bizarre notes that discussed topics that were outside the purview of his knowledge, but as he went deeper and deeper into the hideout, the pull that had just pulled him began to turn into a pain that felt like someone snapping bones in his body, not just in his stomach, though that was where the most agony was felt. He cursed under his breath as the pain increased. His thoughts were confused and he found it difficult to think clearly. He was sitting in a field with a group of people who appeared to be having a good time, smiling and laughing. "Come in for dinner, Naruto." It seemed like the ideal situation, but it ended too quickly. He saw his mother, and they were all seated at the dinner table. His mother chattered joyfully, and his father smiled. He was having short visions all the time, it was like a parade of them. He would enter one room and then enter another, but he would be in a daze the entire time. He limped down the hallway, his foot cut, a scar already forming on his forehead. He had encountered a few traps that he had managed to avoid at first, but because of the strange pain that suddenly came upon him, he was unable to pass some of them. And he was certain that one trap that had caught him on his left arm was laced with poison, which is why it was numb at the moment, or so he assumed. When he limped into another room, the tug in his stomach went crazy, and he was on the floor, screaming in agony and clutching in pain. However, he was shocked to see his doppelganger's confused blue eyes staring down at him with a look of wonder and concern. Naruto quickly covered his surprise, thinking he was dead. His eyes soon gave the boy a look of desperation, but after the redhead stared for a long moment, Naruto gave him a fixed glare. "Help me. Out. Or just stand there," he exclaimed. "That's cool, too." His doppelganger's eyes widened in alarm as he realized he was there. His doppelganger exhaled as he rushed to Naruto, who was kneeling next to him. "I thought I was dead." Grunting, Naruto said, "Join the club." He lived a very adventurous life, but he didn't think it would get that adventurous. Of course, his life was nothing near normal, but that was the only way to describe the entire situation. Sitting in a room with yourself, someone you thought was dead, and wondering how the hell you survive having a demon removed from you. His eyes twisted into a kind of confused trance, and the redhead doppelganger thrashed his arms wildly, threatening to strike the blonde. "I have no idea what I'm doing," he said apologetically. Clearly, Naruto was full of sarcasm and was certain that Kurama would be pleased, but he couldn't be certain because the fox was ignoring him. Those healing abilities would be useful right now. The redhead scowled and said, "I see you're going through it, it's only a matter of time." "What on earth are they discussing?" Naruto snarled, rapidly realizing that something was attempting to take control. It was too soon to consider that the redhead had been by his side while he was crippled on the floor, but all of a sudden he appeared in front of him, grinning broadly, and it took all of Naruto's strength not to do a double take at how similar they truly were. They were in a black void of a place that was dark, with water below them. Naruto frowned as he realized it was his mindscape. Scratch that, his old mindscape. He arrived at last. Took him a whole month, but not everyone is keeping track. "Obviously you." The voice that was almost Kurama's was snapped up by Naruto's head, and his eyes widened in horror and mild amusement as he looked at the person who sounded like Kurama but was actually in human form, with his long red hair spiked and his face so serious. He was crossing his arms and observing Naruto with wild abandon and a certain amount of respect. The redhead turned to Kurama and grinned broadly, saying, "We have a lot to explain and with little time. Go on, Kura-kun. Put it in place." "Subite might, Kako no jutsu." Kurama snarled at the moniker but swiftly performed the hand signals. When Tsunade left the bar and went to her hotel, she was inebriated, but it didn't matter because she had won a whole room's worth of Ryo, so she could have as many drinks as she wanted. As she stumbled home, wondering where Shizun was, she thought, "Oh, yeah, she got a real job." She glanced over her shoulder, not very subtly, and her heart practically dropped when she saw the fat man from the bar who had won her all of the Ryo she now had. She hoped that he wouldn't want to steal some of her money. "Hey, Ba-chan." She was only called that by one person, so she threw the suitcase at the fat man. Her eyes widened as she saw the bald fat man quickly change into a blonde child with spiky hair, and she wondered why she hadn't realized it was a henge instead. She sprinted to get her suitcase and run, but as soon as she did, she stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes widening at the blonde's stunned expression. "Ba-chan, what was that for?" The child let out a moan, but Tsunade was too far gone to be moved when she saw the ghost in front of her. He was different, but he was still there. She had a good relationship with Naruto before she left, and he was like, and she hated to admit it, a grandson, but she was his godmother, and she fell to her knees with tears in her eyes. "Naruto." Willing it to be true, she croaked. Tsunade glanced curiously at the redhead, wondering if it would be wise to do the things she was considering. But the young boy was someone she cared about, and he shared the same goals as everyone else. She had faith that he could accomplish anything, but a little inspiration would be helpful. After all, it was Naruto's birthday. With a sly smile on her face, she thrust the crystal necklace into her godson's chest and said, "Here, Gaki, a gift." Naruto's eyes were bright with wonder as he looked up. "Wow, Tsunade. Ba-chan." Not noticing the glare Tsunade had given him, the 6-year-old Naruto remarked, "Daddy usually says you're too buried in debt to buy me things." The blonde man shrugged sheepishly and scooted back a little, and Naruto added, muttering to himself, "Not that I know what that means." "You shouldn't," Tsunade said with a joyful smile and a pat on the head. Don't ever gamble, though you could if you truly wanted to. Would you like to cut your cake now, Naru-chan? Before entering the kitchen, Kushina interrupted, glancing at Suande. Cake? Go cut your cake, Naruto, so that we can all enjoy it. When Aiko yelled at him, the other children at the birthday celebration rushed into the kitchen, followed by Naruto, who had just put on the necklace. Many thanks, Ba-chan. Before cutting his cake, he yelled.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.